And at 10, Hercules. I think we all know the story of Hercules, whatever version you remember. The Disney animated movie, the DC version, the Roman or the Greek version, it's all generally the same thing. And I mean, even after that, this guy has a rap sheet of like 25 other heroic things he did, just like because he wanted to. A major factor in the well-known tragedies surrounding Hercules is the hatred that the goddess Hera, wife of Zeus, had for him. Because while there were many illegitimate offspring that Zeus, sired, let's say, Hercules was the son of an affair that Zeus had with a mortal woman. And not just any mortal woman, but a mortal that Zeus wanted so badly that he disguised himself as her husband in order to lay with her, and ordered Helios, the god of the sun, to not let the sun rise for 72 hours so that his one last night with her would last. Yeah, so not only is he the bastard of a mortal woman, he's also the product of a forced 3-day night, which I guess doesn't really bother anyone living in like Alaska or Norway, because the whole 6 months of night thing, not anything weird.
Number 9. Odin. Odin ended up joining the Stone Age Avengers sometime after he actually was said to have created the humans on Midgard, which was then known as Aesheim. In doing so, he had disappointed his father Bor, who decided to punish Odin by hurting the humans. Now, as someone who often seems pretty detached from human suffering later in his life, it's pretty wild to think that Odin possibly created them and was perhaps one of the first cosmic beings to actually care for them as a superhero. And I know what you're thinking, but Amanda, we all know Odin is super old. Yeah, you know that, but did you know he was this heroic? Because I always find it very surprising myself. Odin ended up returning to Aesheim to act as its protector and also to learn how to better control Mjolnir, which was his hammer at the time. He ended up befriending multiple prehistoric superheroes, joining the Avengers of 1 million BCE, and he also ended up developing a deeply romantic relationship with his teammate, the Lady Phoenix. In fact, it was even revealed that the Phoenix was actually the true mother of his son, Thor, because that's what's happening now, so there we go.
And it ate Blue Beetle. In 1964, during the Silver Age of comics, Charlton Comics revised the character of Dan Garrett, the original Blue Beetle, for a new Blue Beetle series. Charlton's new Blue Beetle retained the original's name, but no powers or backstory, making him a different character. This Beetle was an archaeologist version of Dan, who obtained a number of superhuman powers including super strength, flight, supervision, ability to generate energy blasts from a mythical scarab that he found during a dig in Egypt, where it had been used to imprison an evil mummified pharaoh, because of course it was, which gave way for the DC Comics version of Jaime Reyes. DC's introduction of Jaime Reyes in 2006 retconned and expanded upon the Blue Beetle mythos, but given that the scarab was found during a dig in Egypt, where it was used as an attempt to overthrow Vandal Savage back in the 26th century BCE. Yeah, that's pretty ancient to me. Okay, I mean the scarab was created by Nabu, for God's sakes.
Number 7. Iron Fist. Fan Fei is the Iron Fist of the Stone Age Avengers, also known as the Avengers of 1 million BCE. Fan Fei is actually the reason why the ritual to become the Iron Fist and gain its unique powers was all about fighting Shao Lao in a battle to the death. This wasn't, however, because Kun Lun wanted to challenge Fan at the time and believed she should, be their champion. This actually happened as the result of a punishment. Fan Fei, you see, was a kung fu master who had been trained since birth in Kun Lun, but her curiosity of the outside world caused her to sort of leave Kun Lun in secret. She came across cavemen who were helpless against the beasts that basically often attacked them, and she decided she was going to help them. Fan sought to help these people by teaching and training them herself in the ways of kung fu. However, it was forbidden in Kun Lun to share your knowledge, and when her people found out, they marked her as a criminal. As punishment, her students were brought to Shao Lao and basically fed to the dragon. Forced to watch, Fan Fei went into a rage, breaking her shackles, seeking to share in the same demise as her students, becoming deeply distraught. However, when she went up against Shao Lao, she struck the dragon and her fist went right through, killing it, and coating her fist in its blood, giving her the power to channel her chi into fiery fists, and leaving her with a dragon mark, which marks her as the Iron Fist.
And at 6, Dr. Fate. Nabu the Wise was a lord of order and cosmic being who arrived at Earth billions of years ago to take on a proactive role in battling the Lords of Chaos. A cosmic being with near limitless magical power, his spirit resides in the Helmet of Fate and is the source of the great power held by those who wear the mantle of Dr. Fate. Dr. Fate is just the helmet fun fact. You all knew that. Dr. Fate's origins begin over 10 billion years ago, which I personally think qualifies as ancient, or maybe even older than that, if there is anything older than that. I don't know. My senior year Comtech teacher was pretty old. But not long after the formation of the universe, were there born two elemental forces, the Lords of Order and the Lords of Chaos. You can kind of see where this conflict is going. On the world called Celia, the Lords of Order manifested themselves, the first sentient race in the universe, and a race of incorporeal magical beings at that. After millennia, circa 3500 BCE, the Lords of Order descended onto Earth and then became Nabu the Wise, who was also an advisor to the pharaohs of Egypt. He's old, okay? I don't know what else I need. I said 10 billion years. I think that's pretty solid.
Number 5, Dormammu. Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Dormammu, I've come to bargain. Dormammu, yeah, you get it. You saw the movie. You know what I'm doing. Doctor Strange's greatest nemesis is also one of the most powerful ancient evils in the Marvel Universe across the multiverse. Ruler of the Dark Dimension, Dormammu is an interdimensional entity capable of existing for eons, capable of all sorts of impressive magical feats like conjuration, being able to summon creatures under his dominion, even bending the law of physics to his will. Dormammu is already crazy strong, but it's only amplified more if he's in the Dark Dimension, his home turf. Now he doesn't just get a home field advantage by being there because the sun's not in his eyes. He's able to siphon energy directly from the Dark Dimension to fuel himself, as well as draining his followers for their energy. Dormammu is the perfect foil for a hero like Doctor Strange, an incredibly powerful, omnipotent being who can't be defeated outright with traditional brawls or fisticuffs, and needs to be outsmarted and outmaneuvered. Luckily, the Sorcerer Supreme usually has a handle on it. Usually.
Number 4, the Chaos King. The entity known as Amatsu Mikubashi originally was portrayed as the Japanese god of evil, but in actuality, he was an offshoot of Oblivion, the cosmic entity embodying the void that existed before the universe began. Because of course he was. An incarnation of the primordial darkness and chaos that existed before the universe, the Chaos King exists as a dark counterpart to the cosmic being Eternity. That by itself makes Amatsu an incredibly powerful being on a cosmic level. In a mission to bring everything to chaos, he started waging war on all the gods of every pantheon in the universe, and he actually did defeat and take control of almost all of them. It took a combined effort of heroes plus Hercules, who was amped up to incredibly insane godlike levels, to take him down in the Chaos War storyline. Absolutely check it out if you haven't already. It's fantastic.
Number 3, Mephisto. If you're not a big comics fan, maybe you recognize the name Mephisto from countless Reddit threads and headlines saying he'd be appearing in the next episode of WandaVision somewhere. Remember how convinced we all were? Simpler days. So just who is Mephisto actually? Well, basically for all intents and purposes, he's the Marvel Comics version of Satan. Where things get incredibly confusing is that he's not actually Satan, because that's a separate character in the Marvel Universe, but he's his own evil, powerful entity, and boy is he that. Mephisto is a long-standing evil, responsible for a lot of some of the biggest suffering in the Marvel Universe. He captured Doctor Doom's mother's soul, he bonded Johnny Blaze to the Ghost Rider, and those are just some of his lesser feats. Mephisto is capable of full-scale reality alteration, like when he infamously changed the entire Marvel timeline to erase Peter and Mary Jane's marriage in exchange for healing Aunt May. Also, he could nip a timeline in the bud where he was defeated by Spider-Man's daughter. You gotta respect that level of pettiness. He hasn't shown up in the MCU yet, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's coming soon. Just give it some time. One more day, maybe.
And in at number 2 is Cyttorak. Cyttorak, also known as the Destroyer, Lord of Oblivion, and Master of the Raging Storm, is an immensely powerful extra-dimensional being hailing from the Crimson Cosmos. He was worshipped as a god and a demon by the primitive humans of Earth until he was banished back to the Crimson Cosmos. As the Destroyer, Cyttorak's main goal is to just cause destruction and raise destructive power. To do this from the Crimson Cosmos, and also to win a wager with 8 other deities like himself, he created the Crimson Gem of Cyttorak, which allows him to select a person to be his avatar, enhancing them to become the indestructible and immortal Juggernaut, like Cain Marko and the other avatars. Now, if you pay close attention to the magic wielders in the Marvel Universe, particularly Doctor Strange, you will hear them invoking Cyttorak's name to cast some of their strongest spells. For example, the Crimson Bands of Cyttorak. He doesn't really show up a lot in the pages of Marvel Comics, but when he does, it's always as this super imposing, terrible force.
And finally, coming in at the number 1 spot, well, it only made sense to have this below everyone else, the one below all. Yeah. Kinda hard to top that. The one below all is the dark side of the one above all, the highest form of creation in the Marvel Multiverse. If the one above all is the embodiment of all the compassion and love that exists out there, well then the one below is the opposite of that and the beautiful embodiment of all the hatred and rage that's inside us all. It's a bit of an eldritch creature, existing in the lowest points of reality, you know, below all, quite literally, it's in the name. It's responsible for all the gamma radiation in the world, as this is how it manifests itself throughout the multiverse. All of Hulk's rage and anger stems from drops of hatred of the one below all, just a tiny fraction of what it could be capable of. The one below all has existed before the multiverse, the universe itself even, and is thought to ultimately be the harbinger of all evil that's ever manifested in the Marvel Universe. Considering how much darkness, how much hate, how much evil exists out there, that's gotta count for something. Mephisto was unable to thwart the one below all, saying it was more powerful than he was. Bruce Banner theorized that no, God of the Symbiotes was just another avatar of the one below all, meaning when it comes to ultimate evil, it's kinda hard to top something below it all.
Number 10, The Immortal. With a name like The Immortal, you bet your socks this guy has been around for a hot minute. Due to an accident that happened approximately 3,000 years ago, the man who became the Immortal was exposed to an unknown anomaly that gave him superhuman abilities that put him almost on par with Viltrumites, making him one of the 3 known beings in the universe that can make that claim. But outside of his incredible strength, speed, durability, stamina, and flight powers, the Immortal is, you guessed it, immortal. Able to regenerate at an insanely fast rate, regrowing limbs and organs, not needing food, water, or oxygen to survive, and being immune to all poisons, toxins, venoms, viruses, bacteria, parasites, pathogens, and allergens. However, funnily enough, there is a way to, quote, kill him. If the Immortal's head is separated from his torso, it needs to be manually reattached for his healing factor to activate. But despite that, even when they aren't attached, he still remains perfectly preserved until the reattachment happens. He's been around for so long that he's been a knight, possibly under King Arthur as Lancelot, an explorer under or possibly as Christopher Columbus in the Spanish Armada. He fought in the American Revolution, became president of the United States by taking the alias of this guy Abraham Lincoln you might have heard of, and he fought as a soldier in the First World War. In the 1930s is when he officially became a superhero and more recently became a member of the Guardians of the Globe.
And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button? Hey, click it! Number 9, The Darkness. The story featuring this host of The Darkness is so vicious and bloody, but also just so raw and emotional. I love it personally. While many think of a Jackie Estacado when they think of The Darkness, he is not the only host The Darkness entity has ever had, which honestly, if you're familiar with the story of Jackie, you probably also kind of know that because, you know, it gets passed down. In fact, there were many who came before Jackie. Case in point, Estacado, the Darkness host who is a leader of a Visigoth tribe during the final days of the ancient Roman Empire, circa 410 BC. After its downfall had really already begun, and some would say even kind of already concluded, I guess, Estacado is a known rebel against the Roman Empire and a powerful one at that, wielding the Darkness in his fight against the last standing Roman legions. He ends up going head to head with Legatus and his legion after already dying and being resurrected by the Darkness twice. While he offers Legatus a chance to surrender, Legatus knows he is doomed either way since the Roman Empire is coming to an end, and so chooses not to back down as he doesn't really see surrendering as a real option given the punishment for doing so, were they even able to make it back home at this point. As such, Legatus's legion falls and Estacado makes plans to march with his tribe to Rome.
Number 8, Ogon Bat. Okay, Ogon Bat is a unique and cool character in his own right, but he was also one of the world's first superheroes ever, even technically coming before Superman. Originating from Japan as the god of justice and protector of the weak, his origin is that he was originally an Atlantean who was sent forward in time 10,000 years to defend the modern world from evil. He wields a scepter that fires bolts of energy, causes mini earthquakes, and slices through steel. He himself was immortal, could fly, breathe underwater, had X-ray vision, and possessed superhuman strength, speed, and invulnerability to bullets and lasers. He was summoned by a little girl who would call on him, causing a sparkle to appear around, which then turned into a bat and then turned into the hero when it's found its enemy. It's very weird, but we just roll with it. While he initially started as a comic, he also has a TV show that appeared in several different countries outside of Japan, and I think he looks really cool. so yeah.
Number 7. Cosmic Ghost Rider. Cosmic Ghost Rider is an interesting one. While I initially thought of the prehistoric Ghost Rider Ghost when it came to old Ghost Riders, I realized that despite being from an alternate future, Cosmic Ghost Rider is also ancient. But you know, future ancient. Cosmic Ghost Rider is the spirit of Frank Castle, who ends up becoming the spirit of vengeance after he is killed during Thanos' invasion of Earth. In this version of the story, Thanos succeeds in basically destroying Earth, and by the time Frank returns as Ghost Rider to the planet's surface, it's kinda too late for him to save his friends. He ends up alone on the planet, and after years and years of solitude with no one left to avenge, becomes, well, insane, as I think pretty much almost anyone would. Despite eventually becoming Thanos' herald, CGR is really doing his best to be a good guy. He only ever really even joined up with Thanos because, you know, well, there was no one left and he didn't want to be alone. Before even joining up with Thanos, Cosmic Ghost Rider did attempt to get his revenge on the Mad Titan, teaming up with Galactus, but even Galactus fell in this fight against this alternate King Thanos.
Number 6. Exodus. Grand Duke Benny du Paris was a 12th century nobleman from medieval France. Does that count as ancient? I don't know, anyone who was around then, so I'm taking it and just running with it, okay? Cool. What you gonna do about it? Nothing, because I'm just an image on your screen. As an adult, Bene was a crusader for the Knights Templar sent to Jerusalem during the Crusades, and he even became best friends with Eobar Garrington, the Black Knight of that era. The two had set out on a quest to find the Tower of Power, when his abilities manifested after an encounter with the Phoenix Force, which were then improved further thanks to the mutant apocalypse. But thanks to Big Blue, Exodus was trapped in a tomb until the modern day when he was awoken by Magneto and joined his cause. Exodus is one of the most powerful psionic mutants in existence, with such a pristine use of telekinesis and telepathy that he can even alter electrons and molecules. His power is so strong that Marvel even had to debuff him by making his powers dependent on his or others' level of faith in this mutant, although he still regularly kicks some serious butt. Number 5. The Immortal. Due to an accident that happened approximately 3,000 years ago in the Image Comics Invincible universe, the man who became the Immortal was exposed to an unknown anomaly that gave him superhuman abilities that put him almost on par with Viltrumites. Outside of his incredible strength, speed, durability, stamina, and flight powers, the Immortal is, you guessed it, immortal. Able to regenerate at an insanely fast rate, regrowing limbs and organs, not needing food, water, or oxygen to survive, and being immune to all poisons, toxins, venoms, viruses, bacteria, parasites, pathogens, and allergens. However, funnily enough, there is a way to, quote, kill him. If the Immortal's head is separated from his torso, it needs to be manually reattached for his healing factor to finally kick in. But despite that, even when they aren't attached, he still remains perfectly preserved until the reattachment happens. He's been around for so long that he has been a knight, possibly under King Arthur, an explorer connected to Christopher Columbus in the Spanish Armada. He fought in the American Revolution, became President of the United States by taking the alias of Abraham Lincoln, became President of the United States by taking the alias of someone you may know, Abraham Lincoln, and he fought as a soldier in the First World War. In the 1930s is when he finally officially became a superhero, and more recently became a member of the Guardians of the Globe. Coming in at number 4, Exodus. Grand Duke Benny du Paris was a 12th century nobleman from medieval France, so he is probably one of the youngest people to make this list. As an adult, Bennett was a crusader for the Knights Templar sent to Jerusalem during the Crusades, and he even became best friends with Eobar Garrington, the Black Knight of that era. The two had set out on a quest to find the Tower of Power, when his abilities manifested after an encounter with the Phoenix Force. This granted Bennett some pretty powerful telepathic powers, but pretty quickly, these powers were then improved upon thanks to the mutant Apocalypse, and his ability to augment other individuals. Unfortunately, Apocalypse also caused Exodus to be trapped in a tomb until the modern day when he was awoken by Magneto and joined his cause, which you think would make him a villain, but he has become more of a hero as time has gone on. Exodus is one of the most powerful psionic mutants in existence, with such a pristine use of telekinesis and telepathy that he can even alter electrons and molecules. His power is so strong that Marvel even had to debuff him by making his powers dependent on his or others' level of faith in him. Still, Pretty powerful though. Number 3, the Eternals. Way back in the day, the Celestials came to Earth when proto-humans began to emerge, meaning around 2 to 5 million years ago. That's a long freaking time. The Celestial first host performed genetic experiments on those early humans, resulting in 3 groups. The immortal and superior Eternals, the pretty grotesque and monstrous deviants, and just plain Jane regular humans. The Eternals, aka Homo Immortalis, were basically created to defend the planet Earth, specifically from the deviants and to serve Celestials. They became somewhat silent defenders of Homo sapiens, that's us, secluding themselves and rarely directly engaging with us. They built super impressive cities like Olympia, Titanos, Oceania, and Polaria, and their names have become intertwined with heroes throughout ancient history, like Gilgamesh. They are all incredibly powerful and they are all immortal, being reborn if they ever actually are defeated. An average Eternal is intertwined with cosmic energy and can lift about 15 tons without using any form of telekinesis, but a few are able to lift up to 100 tons. Other Eternals specialize in different powers like telepathy and telekinesis, and all Eternals have the ability to join with one another to form the Unimind, made of light, mind, and pure energy. And I haven't even talked about the massive Eternals called the Hex, and I'm not going to, because we're moving on. Coming in at number 2, Eternal Warrior. Gilad Anipada from Valiant Comics was ancient before the rise of the Pharaohs, and apparently will also survive the fall of nations yet to come. Gilad, also known as the Eternal Warrior, is the youngest of 3 Eternal brothers. His siblings are Ivar, aka Time Walker, and Aram, aka Armstrong. They are all immortal and were born before recorded history, so that's a long time ago. The Eternal Warrior himself is a sworn protector to the Geomancers, who are basically humans who have a special bond with the spirit of the earth itself. When the current Geomancer is accidentally taken out by Obadiah Archer, Gilad is driven by his duty to track down Obadiah and exact revenge. Only problem is, Archer happens to be one half of Archer and Armstrong. Armstrong being Gilad's older brother that we just talked about, who he hasn't spoken to in decades. Armstrong tries to protect his best buddy Archer from his brother, but the relentless Gilad eventually catches up to them, and the duo's only solution now is to find a new Geomancer. Archer and Armstrong eventually track down the new Geomancer, Kay McHenry, who convinces Gilad to not obliterate the duo, which Gilad is more than capable of doing with his thousands of years of fighting experience, his mastery in tactics, and being one of the greatest warriors on Earth. Not to mention his exceptional strength, inhuman durability, and endurance, and the ability to heal from pretty much any wound. And finally, in at number 1, it's Martian Manhunter. Martian Manhunter, aka John Johns, or John Jones on Earth, is the last of his race of Martians, and he is extremely powerful, and should never be slept on, but he usually is. He speaks with the resolve and intelligence of someone who's been around for a very hot minute, and that's because he has been. According to DC, he is in the ballpark of around, or over, 220 million years old. John arrived on Earth after he was pulled there through space and time by a teleportation beam during an experiment conducted by Dr. Saul Erdl, who passed away from the shock of actually finding a Martian shortly after this. But way before that, John's race was practically wiped out a long time ago, leaving him completely alone and isolated. But now, pulled forward in time and finally on Earth with no one to tell him what the hell was going on, he eventually used his shape-shifting abilities to become a detective operating in Middletown, America. For a long time, he mainly operated from the safety of his human persona before he eventually exposed himself to the world, not like that, and became a founding member of the Justice League, and also one of its most powerful and ancient members as well. Kicking off the list today at number 10 is Conan the Barbarian. Conan was born on a carnage-strewn battlefield in the hills of the westernmost region of Chimeria, all the way back in the Hyborian Age, aka around 13 to 10,000 BC. The fact that Conan was born on a battlefield was considered to be an omen that Conan would grow up to be a great warrior one day, and that was not wrong. He was one of the most accomplished swordsmen of the Hyborian Age and is often listed alongside King Arthur, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Zorro as one of the greatest fictional male sword fighters in history, which is a really cool thing to put on a resume. Conan has unusual strength, agility, and speed for a human being. He has lifted immense objects or enemies, even breaking the neck of a raging bull when he was still pretty young. It is said that he has the strength equivalent of about 10 to 20 men, but he has been knocked over by just 2 dudes before, so don't take that as a fact. More often than not, Conan relies upon his lightning-fast reflexes in combat situations, and they very rarely let him down. On top of that, he has a massive level of durability, and through years of dealing with sorcerers, magicians, and witches, he has even developed a moderate level of resistance to magic and mind control spells. Conan is a master warrior. He has a hardy survival instinct, is a master of stealth, and is multilingual. While primarily known as a wandering sellsword, Conan progressively became a master tactician, leading entire armies into battle, and eventually, Conan even became the king of Aquilonia, and also eventually a hero interacting with the heroes of the modern day. In at number 9, it's Red Sonja. If we are talking about Conan the Barbarian, then we need to talk about Red Sonja, because not only is she from the same time period, she's arguably even more capable than Mr. Barbarian himself. Red Sonja lived with her family in a humble home in the western Hyrcanian steppes. I don't know if I pronounced that right, so let me know in the comments down below. When she had just turned 17 years old, a group of mercenaries attacked, taking the lives of her father, Ivor, her mother, and her 2 younger brothers, and burning their house and all their possessions to the ground. Now she survived, but was then horribly mistreated by the leader of that group. Understandably, Sonja raged for some revenge. Answering this, the red goddess Skatak appeared to her and instilled incredible skill in the handling of swords and other weapons under the condition that she would never lay with a man unless he defeated her in combat, which is a weird kind of thing to say, I guess. Going forward as Red Sonja, she honed her skills with the blade and became a sellsword, eventually even slaying the evil wizard Kulan Gath, but he came back. Red Sonja was one of the most powerful and skilled swordsmen in any era, among both men and women. She was also in peak human physical condition, a martial arts expert, and possessed knowledge and experience in fighting the supernatural. And she beat Conan. So, number 8, Hercules. Hercules is the son of Zeus, Skyfather and supreme ruler of the gods of Olympus, and Alcmena, a mortal woman who lived over 3,000 years ago. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, arranged for her father Zeus to have a half-mortal son to be the world's champion. Zeus seduced the mortal queen Alcmena, pretending to be her husband, King Amphitryon. I'm sorry if I pronounced that too. Alcmena gave birth to the baby Hercules, and as an adult demigod in ancient Greece, Hercules achieved worldwide fame as he became the greatest hero of the ancient world, best known for his 12 labors. As the Olympian god of strength as well, Hercules' strength is unlimited, making him one of the strongest and most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe. As an infant, he was breastfed by his stepmother, Hera, queen of the Olympian gods, which increased his already demigod physiology to godlike levels. Hercules possessed the superhuman physical attributes of an Olympian god, but interestingly, some of his powers are actually superior to the vast majority of the other gods. Most recently, he has been a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy, but he has also been part of the Avengers, the God Squad, Council of Godheads, the Mighty Avengers, the Secret Avengers, the Defenders, the Heroes for Hire, and, of course, S.H.I.E.L.D. Coming in at number 7 today is Dream. The Endless, featured in DC's Sandman story, are a group of 7 siblings: Death, Destiny, Despair, Desire, Delirium, Destruction, and the focus of our point today, Dream. These siblings represent fundamental aspects and forces of the Vertigo/DC universe, and are all immortal, ageless, and pretty much nigh omnipotent. The parents of the Endless were revealed to be Time, the embodiment of all time itself, father of the Endless, and Night, the embodiment of the infinite darkness that existed before the dawn of the universe, and mother of the Endless. So it's safe to say that these beings are probably pretty ancient, like 10 billion years old ancient. As for Dream himself, or Morpheus, he isn't so much a superhero as we are used to, but he is an extremely powerful, reluctant hero is what I would say, and his journey to that status, from a motionless god to a being displaying very human-like emotions and characteristics, is the fundamental story of the Sandman itself. Dream dwells in a realm called the Dreaming, from where he controls the fundamental concepts of fantasy and reality in the universe, as the line between the waking world and the dream world is quite thin. Coming in at number 6, it's Odin. While the god of thunder Thor almost made this list, his father was, and sometimes is, still a hero, and he is much older than his son, as you might be able to guess, because father and son relationships be like that. While Marvel plays a little fast and loose with Thor's age, it most recently has been said to be roughly 4,000 years old, but his daddy? Marvel Comics changed Odin's age a few times for the sake of stories, but we can assume that Odin is quite old, far more than 1,000,000 years, as Odin was part of the Avengers of 1,000,000 BC, and by that time, he was seemingly in his prime like Thor is now. So yes, the All-Father, creator of Asgard and ruler of the Norse pantheon of gods, is pretty damn old. Who would have thought? Not me. But he is certainly no pushover. Being the protector of the 10 realms, he is the strongest and wisest of all Asgardians. In his physical prime, he could lift 90 tons, but that number can be boosted up a whole lot to a whole other level thanks to Odin's ability to tap into the Odin Force, which has allowed him to headbutt Galactus into unconsciousness, which is really impressive. As an example of the power he wields, Odin had a fight with Seth, another god, which was waged on several planes of existence simultaneously and felt across infinite planes of reality. The energy released from their battle was so powerful, it shattered entire galaxies, reignited dying suns, and ripped the fabric of the multiverse itself. So, yeah. He's pretty nuts.
Number 5, Morlun and the Inheritors. Morlun and the Inheritors sounds like the name of a band. A band of vampires? Not a thing. A coven of vampires, really, I guess I should say. And no, I don't believe they play musical instruments and or perform in any kind of musical acts, sadly. Morlun and the Inheritors are a threat that we meet as we go into the Spider-Verse. They were the main antagonists of the Spider-Verse event in the comics, which promised to feature all the alternate Spider-Men, women, and folks that had ever featured. And they were also the main antagonists of the follow-up event, Spider-Geddon. The Inheritors are basically energy vampires that feed specifically on what is known as totemic life energy. What is that? What is a totem? It is usually a superpowered or somewhat unique individual who represents some kind of powerful animal instinct or arachnid avatar, like spiders! Morlun specifically is well known for being a main villain of Spider-Man's, and while he's not as prominently featured as, some of other Spidey's villains, he is still particularly powerful. We don't really know, I don't think, how old the Inheritors or Morlun are, at least not in their first life, but we do know they're pretty old, having participated in fights in the multiverse seemingly a long time ago. Also, they'd like to dress up super Victorian, so they gotta at least be from that era or beyond, although they're not necessarily Earth-based villains, they're multiversal villains. Number 4, Sin. Sin might be one that people are a little bit more familiar with in another form, but also there might be a lot of you out there who aren't, as this villain hails from the Spawn comics. If you are up to date with your Spawn reading, then you know who I'm talking about here, but for those of you who aren't up to date or who maybe have never read Spawn, this villain was actually formerly known as a longtime ally of Al Simmons' Spawn, his mentor in a way, Cogliostro. While initially just seeming like a well-meaning fellow Hellspawn, seeking to teach Al the ropes and also help to guide him away from being fully used as a pawn of hell, Cogliostro is actually later revealed to be more ancient than we might have otherwise thought, in fact also being known by another name even before he was known as Cog. Cain. Yeah, the Cain, the man from biblical myth who killed his brother and was condemned for it, Cain of Cain and Abel. After revealing that he was really only helping Spawn to serve his own interests and becoming a villain, Cog was redeemed once more for a short little while before becoming a villain again, who has the ability to drain the power of other Hellspawns, being known now as Sin. Sin with 2 N's. Number 3, Rama-Tut. While we all know Kang the Conqueror now, thanks to him being featured in the MCU in Quantumania, and the hype for his inclusion in that film being very real, I would say at this point, not everyone is as familiar with the other versions of Nathaniel Richards from Earth 6311. Despite the fact that this is a villain from the future, Kang actually has existed across time in many different forms, adopting the form even of an ancient pharaoh. This was back when Kang was a ruler in ancient Egypt, before he was really even Kang. Nathaniel Richards became obsessed with the reality of Earth 616 and would eventually construct a time machine shaped like a sphinx and use it to travel back in time to around 2960 BC. Having brought with him a robotic army and advanced futuristic weapons, it wasn't long before Nathaniel was the ruler of Egypt, taking the name of Rama-Tut. This version of Nathaniel also became focused and obsessed on the creation of En-Sabah-Nur, who, as Rama-Tut knew, was destined to become the world's first mutant. Number 2, Perpetua. Perpetua is one of those characters who is super powerful and who tons of people should know about, really, just for that reason alone, I would say. But no. Instead, most folks know more about the Anti-Monitor, Perpetua's son, than they do about her. Granted, this could be because she's simply a newer character, and in that case, fair enough. She's a newer character, but she's also really old because she's kind of like a retcon character. Perpetua is known for being the first one to create the multiverse, or at least, one of the first people, depending on how you like to reconcile DC lore, because I feel like Perpetua isn't the first one that we've said that about. While Anti-Monitor is the character most well known for causing the Crisis on Infinite Earths, it's later revealed that Perpetua was the one truly pulling his strings, and therefore responsible for this crisis. In fact, Perpetua feeds off Crisis energy, and is said to have been responsible for all crises we've seen. At least all crises we've seen before Dark Crisis, likely, since I think she was dead when that one actually took place, so, or at least defeated. Is she still alive? I don't think so. Number 1. Rotath of Lemuria. Heading back to the Hyborian Age once again on one of our ancient lists, which by the way, if you want to visit the Hyborian Age again and again, you should check out part 1 and part 2 of our ancient superheroes list. We got you. Rotath of Lemuria is a common example of how magic was presented often in stories from the Hyborian Age, especially in regards to Conan's story there. Rotath made his first appearance in issue number 37 of Conan the Barbarian from the 70s, when everyone was into the sword and sorcery genre. In this same issue, Rotath was killed by Kull after he was hired by the king of Lemuria, who was frightened of Rotath's power. As he died though, Rotath cursed both the king and Kull, casting a spell so that he might return. And so he did, this time in a golden body, but still he ended up being defeated, this time not by Kull directly, but instead of course after fighting Conan and Juma, and also being defeated by a giant slug, which that part is a little random, but hey.
Coming in at number 10 is Selene. Selene is a mutant, and what is known as an external. Externals are essentially a group of immortals that include characters like Apocalypse and Gideon, who can resurrect themselves and all share a psychic link, which is the main thing that separates them from other immortals. Selene is also a magician and was born 17,000 years ago. She gained the ability to psionically drain the life forces of other human beings into herself, gaining their memories, and if she fully drains them, turning that individual into dust. Essentially, she's like an energy vampire. Using this drained energy, she not only sustains herself, but can grant herself superhuman levels of physical strength, speed, stamina, agility, reflexes, and durability. Since she has been around for so long, she is quite the adept sorcerer and can do a hell of a lot with that power. She's demonstrated telepathy, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, and a knack for being pretty sinister, but not really being too well known to casual fans. Number 9. Barbatos. Barbatos is one of the big bads from the death metal event, but because we had the Batman Who Laughs, I think Barbatos kind of fell by the wayside for a few people, and I'll admit, I was one of them. But Barbatos is nothing to scoff at. In the earliest days of existence, two siblings came into reality, tasked with monitoring creation. Along with them came a third being known as the Forger, who was set to watch over creations that would exist in the future. The Forger made its home in the Forge of Worlds inside what would later be named the Dark Multiverse. The Forger created universes based on the hopes and fears of every living thing. And while the stable universes became part of the multiverse, the Forger would dispatch its dragon to destroy the unstable worlds so that their energy could be returned to the Forge and recycled. That dragon is Barbatos. Barbatos had a lust for destruction, which eventually led him to take out the Forger and corrupt the World Forge. The unstable worlds persisted beyond their time and became part of the Dark Multiverse field with horrifying realities. He then changed his goals, setting his warpath onto the regular multiverse. Now fast forward multiple centuries, and Barbatos' followers started to secretly prepare Batman to become the doorway for Barbatos to enter the Prime Earth from the Dark Multiverse, causing a big old mess in the DC Multiverse. Number 8. Decimus Furious. Decimus Furious actually began his life all the way back in ancient Rome, where his mother and father took their own lives, leaving Decimus homeless on the streets. In 281 AD, while on the cusp of the afterlife and in incredible pain due to his hunger, this mutant's powers finally activated. He gained superhuman strength and durability alongside an extremely bestial form similar to a minotaur, but almost as if made of stone, like a minotaur statue, but cooler. While he is incredibly strong and durable, his even more powerful mutant ability is called Empathic War Infection. This basically means that Decimus can infect anyone who he strikes with a thirst for war, which will send them into a rage-filled state. It also acts as a defensive tool against telepaths who try to read or control his mind, causing the war infection to overcome the telepath. He has also been shown to be able to piece himself back together after being blown up, which is funny because he blew up when Fantomex made him feel love, which did not compute, and he went boom. Decimus became Apocalypse's final horseman of war. And in at number 7 is Conquest. Viltrumites, who are featured in Image Comics' Invincible series, are incredibly hardy folk. They have levels of strength and durability akin to Superman without having to be solar charged and without being allergic to big green rocks. They also grow stronger and stronger with both age and experience. One of their oldest, most honored warriors is a Viltrumite by the name of Conquest. Viltrumites live for a very long time. Nolan Grayson, Omni-Man, is a fully adult Viltrumite, and he has lived for thousands and thousands of years, and he has only a small show of white hair to show for it. Of all the Viltrumites seen in the comics, a rare few have fully white hair. Conquest not only has that, but he has lost a lot of his hair, is super wrinkly, and he's also battle scarred and missing an arm. Back in the day, the Viltrumites were exposed to a virus that nearly wiped them out, called the Scourge virus. Conquest was one of the few that survived, but he was left weakened after it left his system, which happened to coincide with his arrival on a planet filled with Ragnar, which are the only species in the universe that can actually kill Viltrumites. So that's where the missing arm and scarring comes from. Conquest is one of the strongest Viltrumites around, and even when his face is turned into tomato soup by Invincible, he still regenerates and comes back for round 2. Number 6, Male Bolgia. And we are sticking with Image Comics for this point, but moving away from Invincible, we are going to talk about Spawn. Now, yes, I am a little lacking in the knowledge department when it comes to Spawn comics, but I do know that the whole reason Al Simmons became a Hellspawn in the first place is because of this guy, the ruler of the 8th sphere of Hell, Male Bolgia. Over 70,000 years ago, this being was created by a past ruler of Hell out of necroplasm rivers, but he was so powerful that he betrayed, overpowered, and took the life of his creator. In order to wage war on heaven and destroy God, he created an army of Hellspawn, but he needed a general, which he couldn't find until he found Al Simmons. He made a deal with a man named Jason Wynn to take Al's life, which is when Male Bolgia made a deal for Al to become his general in exchange for being able to see his wife. But in the end, it didn't really work out too well for this ruler of Hell, did it? Nope.
Number 5, Lady Phoenix. While I did think that Phoenix was a little too on the nose for my part 1 of this list, there were some who actually requested her in the comments, so fair enough. Some people want to know more about her. And since she was featured in our thumbnail / cover photo for that first part of our list, I felt for all you loyal nerds who came to this part 2, I should oblige you and tell you more about Lady Phoenix. Who is the woman we featured on that thumb? She is also a member of the 1 million BCE Avengers, also nicknamed the Stone Age or Prehistoric Avengers. Before she was the host of the Phoenix, she was simply known as Firehair, named after her bright red hair, which left her abandoned by her parents only shortly after she was born into the world. Anyone who their tribe deemed basically different in some way was sacrificed in this manner. This was also to be the fate of Firehair, but she was rescued by wolves, so she ended up being okay. She grew up among her pack, but eventually joined up with the Tribe Without Fear, a group of prehistoric mutants. Her own mutant powers would manifest, and she would eventually lose her tribe and become bonded to the Phoenix Force. Ultimately resisting its dark temptations, she would go on to become one of the founding members of the Stone Age Avengers alongside Odin. While it was suggested that Lady Phoenix was actually the true mother of Thor, we learned in Avengers 1 million BC issue number 1 from 2022 that her relationship ended with Odin before Thor was born, with Gaia being Thor's natural mother as we knew before, Freya being Thor's adoptive mother, and Lady Phoenix being dubbed kinda like his bonus mother, after she helped Gaia give birth to Thor and saved him from a premature death. And then Gaia was like, you can be mother to Thor too. So we got that all figured out. Sorry what I said on part 1 is not exactly true. Not his mother, well she is his mother, but she's not his only mother. He's got a lot of mothers. Number 4, Artemis. Artemis was also once Wonder Woman, don't you know? Back in the New Earth continuity, she herself is an Amazon, and despite her youthful appearance, like most Amazons, she's pretty old. In fact, in the New Earth continuity, she was also granted eternal youth as the result of a spell that Circe had cast upon her. In the Prime Earth continuity, she is just straight up immortal. She hails from the Bana Migdal, which is a splinter group of Amazons all their own. Like I said, there are many different tribes. Princess Diana of Themyscira and Artemis have often been presented as rivals in the comics, with Artemis often being jealous of Wonder Woman and kind of striving to prove herself superior to Diana. But despite this, she is ultimately a force for good and a hero, though her warrior's heart might be a little harder in comparison maybe to Diana's when it comes to her heroic approach. Number 3. Red Sonja. Red Sonja is an interesting one to think of as old, considering how she is often portrayed in the comics, but like Conan, who I touched on during the part 1 of this list, Sonja herself is also ancient in the sense that she hails from the past, the Hyborian Age. She was a creation of Robert E. Howard's, who initially existed within Marvel, but eventually ended up being moved over to Dynamite when it comes to who owns the right to this fiery, fierce warrior character. The Hyborian Age was actually a pastime in Marvel history, at least that is what we're led to believe based on the fact that both she and Conan hail from the reality of Earth 616. Red Sonja set out on her path to become a fierce fighter at a young age, after she was left orphaned when her family were killed and her people were attacked by a group of mercenaries. Red Sonja hails from Western Hyrcania and often fights to help those who cannot help themselves, even sometimes training those she comes across so that they might actually act as a hero in their own story. She is sometimes also a sword for hire, but generally only takes jobs that kind of fit with her own particular moral code. And she does have a moral code, even though she's a mercenary a lot of the times. Number 2. Shazam. Wait. Billy Batson is super old? No, we aren't talking about Shazam. Not that Shazam. Not the Shazam formerly known as Captain Marvel. We're talking about the Wizard, who gave Billy Batson his powers and who has also been known by the name of Shazam. Initially in the Prime Earth continuity, we were led to believe that the Wizard was simply someone who bestowed powers on Billy, but we'd later learned that he was actually one of the old gods Shazam would actually get his powers from. This truth of the Wizard's, aka Mama Roggins, aka Shazam's origin would be revealed after Billy Batson was left depowered following the action of Grail, Darkseid's daughter, who basically cut off his access to his powers by untethering the old gods from his magic lightning. While not a direct superhero, the Wizard is a powerful force of good who is even able to help repower Billy from the afterworld in spirit form, finding basically new gods for him to be empowered by. Number 1. Eternal Warrior. Marvel and DC are not the only publishers who have ancient heroes. Even Dynamite, now owning Red Sonja, is not the only publisher with ancient superheroes by any stretch. A lot of people have ancient superheroes. In fact, one publisher that was suggested in the comments that has tons of ancient superheroes is Valiant Comics, so I'm happy to be talking to you about that. Great suggestion. This particular hero from Valiant that we're talking about is Gilad Anipada. Gilad was one of 4 siblings granted immortality. He has used this extended time over his life to train up, becoming a master in many different areas of combat. He acts as a hero in the comics, being tasked with defending the Geomancer of any given generation. Geomancers were kind of born in a line, and they're magical heroes in their own right who were chosen to act on behalf of the Earth as the planet's defender, and who are able to communicate with nature and the Earth. And the Eternal Warrior basically just acts as like their guardian, so heroes protecting heroes. Number 10. The Question. In the Prime Earth continuity, the Question, or a version of the Question, is revealed to be one of the oldest beings in the world of DC. This is revealed after we learn that the Question was one of the criminals in essence that the Circle of Eternity, located at the Rock of Eternity, chose to punish for their crimes against humanity. This group of beings who were punished were known as the Trinity of Sin. The Question would go on to become a hero following this. This version of the Question is largely a mysterious figure who has not appeared as much, probably because the original version of the character, Vic Sage, and his predecessor, Renee Montoya, ended up both returning to the comics recently. What we do know is that the Question had his memory erased from history and from himself, with even his face being left completely featureless, so he could never remember who he was. This was part of his punishment, but also done to guarantee that the Question would not be able to rise up once more as he had threatened to do originally, since he would no longer be able to remember what exactly he had done and why in the first place. So how can he return if he doesn't even know, why he was doing it in the first place? And apparently, we may never get to know any of this either, unless somebody returns to tell the rest of this version of the question's tale. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you also love superheroes that are surprisingly old, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 9. The Eternals. The Eternals are simply a group of heroes most people don't often think of, which is why I'm including them here. Despite them coming to the MCU, I would still say there are tons out there who have fallen off the MCU bandwagon recently and kind of just weren't particularly compelled to watch this film. So there are still a lot who do not know about the Eternals, which is unfortunate. This is a huge shame, I think, because the Eternals are really a cool group of heroes who have existed for millennia. Initially, their origin was that they were prehistoric humans who were basically modified by celestial tech, turned into their own race of beings. Later on, we'd get an additional bit of information on their origin in terms of kind of how they worked, how they operated, with them being resurrected by the Great Machine on the regular anytime they died. That's how they were eternal, almost being like kind of androids with a soul in a sense at one point. The Great Machine is actually also Earth, which is both a big blue ball that everyone lives on and, at its core, an actual machine, a resurrection machine in part. Its survival is intrinsic to the survival of Earth and all life forms living on it, and it was, up until recently, also tied to the Eternals, meaning that for Earth to continue, the Eternals would also have to continue to be called into existence. The Eternals, being ancient heroes, were initially the enemies of the Deviants, who were also created by the Celestials. They defended Earth against the Dark Celestials, or they tried to, and have also become ingrained in human mythology, with them being the real-world heroes from ancient epics and folklore. Hawkgirl. While Hawkman recently appeared in Black Adam in the DCEU, which has been rebranded with their highly anticipated reset impending as simply the DCU, Hawkman isn't the only hero out there who is ancient among the Justice Society. And no, I'm not talking about Dr. Fate, who also is pretty old. In fact, many people probably didn't even know that Hawkman was really even ancient per se. He doesn't look old, that's for sure, but he is, in fact, not in body, but in soul. Hawkman is the reincarnated soul of ancient Egyptian Prince Khufu Qatar. Carter Hall is only the latest in a line of incarnations of the prince in the comics, and his love, Shayara, was also reincarnated as well throughout the years, becoming known as the hero Hawkgirl and also as Hawkwoman. Later, this origin would be retconned, tweaked somewhat, so they'd actually be even older than ancient Egypt, instead becoming ancient aliens from the planet Thanagar, who simply came to Earth. Their original souls in this version of the tale were each believed to belong to Shra and Qatar the Deathbringer, who were both cursed to be reincarnated alongside each other throughout eternity. Number 7. Gaia. Gaia is someone that we perhaps don't think of as being an ancient superhero because, well, we just don't really think of Gaia that much. She hails from Marvel Comics and is the goddess of Earth. Gaia is seen as one of the oldest gods that Marvel has to offer us, being one of their elder gods. In fact, Gaia is kind of one of the only elder gods who could be seen as heroic or good. At least one of I would say she's up there, considering she is one of the few who managed to avoid becoming a demon. She also actively sought out the Demiurge in order to produce offspring that would help to rid the universe of the other elder gods who had been corrupted after they became demonic, giving birth to Atum, who then became the Demigorge, the God Eater. She's probably also one of the oldest heroes mentioned on this list at all, so there's also that. Number 6. Nubia. Nubia is possibly even older than most other Amazons, who are generally known for being old and immortal just standardly. In Infinite Frontier, her story was retconned so that she was no longer a woman held and mistreated against her will for a long time, but a princess reborn in the Well of Souls. Nubia was born from the Well of Souls reincarnated around the same time that Princess Diana was born, and the two grew up often being thought of as sisters. And if you're wondering why I was mentioning that she might be older than some of the other Amazons, that's just because she's reincarnated. So although Nubia in her own form is around the same age as Diana, she also got an old soul, you know what I mean? She would spend many years as the guardian of Doom's doorway, and would act as a loyal supporter to Queen Hippolyta, even when it seemed that she had betrayed her. In fact, Nubia's loyalty to the Amazons in the current continuity has not failed, and she even recently was chosen to be the new queen of the Amazons. And we're not just talking about the Amazons of Themyscira either, but in fact all known Amazons in existence, as there are actually multiple Amazonian tribes in existence throughout the world.
Number 5. Uranos. Okay, technically this guy actually appeared in What If number 12. 24 in September of 1980, but he didn't really do much and was never really mentioned until very recently. Uranos the Undying is an Eternal and one of the deadliest beings in the Marvel Universe. Uranos, like every Eternal, was created by the Celestials 1 million years ago, but he believed the Eternals best fulfilled their purpose if they exterminated both the deviants and humans, all life outside the universe, and imprisoned the Celestials. Luckily, his brothers Kronos and Oceanus disagreed, plunging the Eternals into a civil war. Ultimately, Uranos lost that war and was captured by his brothers and became the first Eternal to be imprisoned within the Exclusion, where he stayed for over 500,000 years because of the failsafe he imposed upon the Machine. That failsafe being that if he dies, his greatest celestial designed weapons will be unleashed on the world. Recently, mutants have been revealed to be related to deviants, making the X-Men enemies to the Eternals, and the Eternal Druid called on Uranus for help in Axe Judgment Day #1. And he definitely did help, as in a matter of 20 minutes, Uranos eradicated Cable, Magneto, and David Haller, otherwise known as Legion, along with a bunch of other powerful Omega level mutants. Number 4. Yuga Khan. Yuga Khan is the first ever tyrannical ruler of the planet of Apocalypse, and the father of both Drax, who would become the Infinity Man, and Uxas, who would become Darkseid. Given his nature as essentially a god and one that fathered the current gods, Yuga Khan is certainly ancient, being essentially immortal. As an example, before the fourth world is even fully formed, Yuga Khan alongside his wife, Hegra, and their sons ruled Apocalypse, creating one of the most feared empires in the entire universe. But being such an astronomically powerful being, it wasn't enough for him. Yuga Khan was obsessed with becoming the most powerful being in the universe and wanted to be able to essentially control it all. But he was also obsessed with finding out the reason for why it all exists. So he's a conqueror, sure, but he's also a philosopher, which is nice. This obsession is what brought him to the Source Wall, getting trapped in it while trying to unravel the mysteries of the Source. All the inhabitants of New Genesis are way stronger, faster, and smarter than humans, being almost all on a level akin to Superman, while also being immortal. But Yuga Khan, he is the most powerful of them all. So much so that after an absolutely colossal effort, Yuga Khan was even able to break free of the Source Wall. That act released energies that could be felt throughout the galaxy and caused the universe itself to shake. I don't even know how that works. He then replenished his power by absorbing the entire life force of the planet Velos and all its inhabitants, and then did the same thing for millions of other worlds while on his way to Apocalypse. His return to Apocalypse made everyone tremble, including its current ruler, his son Darkseid, who he imprisoned in the core of the planet. Most recently though, Yuga Khan was one of the beings empowering Shazam during Darkseid War. Number 3. Kulan Gath. Kulan Gath was a sorcerer who lived in Earth's Hyborian era, aka the time of Conan the Barbarian. So yes, he is incredibly ancient. He actually isn't the original Kulan Gath though. Well, he is, and he isn't. You see, Kulan Gath had a slave who poisoned him and assumed his identity. When this Kulan Gath sought out the training of the then Sorcerer Supreme, Mekri Ra, he was refused. He responded by taking the life of and consuming the Sorcerer Supreme, gaining his power. As an enemy of Conan the Barbarian, Kulan was eventually beheaded by the Barbarian, but not before he had become immortal by putting his essence into a magical amulet. So yes, he pulled a Voldemort and made a Horcrux. After the amulet had made its way to Manhattan in the modern era, it ended up in the hands of a mugger, who donned the amulet, allowing Kulan Gath to possess and transform the body of the mugger. Then, he transformed Manhattan into a replica of the time he came from, manipulated the minds of everyone there, and took control of the minds of the Avengers, X-Men, New Mutants, and Morlocks to hunt down Spider-Man. It took the combined powers of Doctor Strange and the mutant magic to change time so that the mugger was killed by Nimrod instead and never possessed by Gath. You know you're a problem when people just go back in time to make sure that you never get back. Number 2, the Great Darkness. So great. You can't get much more ancient than existing before creation. The Great Darkness was the literal darkness and nothingness that existed before the Presence ever came to be. When the Presence, aka God, said, "Let there be light," the Great Darkness is the one who went into hiding. At some point, a clan known as the Brujeria, which is, I think I said that right, attempted a ritual to reawaken the Great Darkness in order to destroy God and reshape the universe. Instead of being completely evil though, it was more like an animal who was confused and didn't understand its power or what its purpose even was. The Great Darkness, also sometimes referred to as the Great Evil Beast, went on a warpath, easily defeating many heroes and waging a solo assault on heaven itself, decimating everything in its way to demand answers from the presence. It even caused the three main figures of hell to form a union with each other just in case it decided to attack them, which it didn't. When the Great Darkness reached heaven though, it met Swamp Thing, of all people, who taught it the concept of good and evil, explaining that one couldn't survive without the other. The darkness then reached up and God reached back and they became one and the same as yin and yang, or as a balance, that kind of thing. Recently though, the Great Darkness played a large role in the Dark Crisis event. It's basically the overarching villain of the entire DC multiverse, but also, it's kinda just a force of nature. Sort of. Number 1, the Black Winter. You know, Galactus almost made this list, but why choose him when you can choose the bigger, more dangerous, and surprisingly not well-known pappy of Galactus? Where Galactus consumes individual planets, the Black Winter devours entire realities. The Black Winter, also known as the Star Plague, the Blight Storm, the Rot Blizzard, or the Thimble Winter, was the one who brought the end to the 6th iteration of the cosmos, leaving only Galen of the planet Ta, the one who becomes Galactus, alive. The Black Winter essentially made Galen his herald, so when the Black Winter arrives in the Marvel Universe in the latest run of Thor, Galactus turns an All-Father Thor who possessed the Thor Force into his Herald of Thunder, granting him the power cosmic, and an attack from this Thor only stops the Black Winter for a total of 14 seconds. That's nuts! That's how powerful this multiversal entity is. But luckily, at this time, the Black Winter isn't here to destroy the universe. He's just here for his herald, Galactus. But still, Thor turns Galactus into a massive power cosmic explosion that destroys the Black Winter completely, and it's incredibly awesome. And number 10, Mistress Death. To call this character evil is a bit of a miscommunication. She is just a law of the universe, a force of nature, a cosmic being carrying out her duty. But to many people, she is an evil entity because, I mean, losing a loved one is one of the most emotionally painful things we can go through. No matter if you see her as evil or just doing her job, she has been around since the creation of the universe, so there is no doubt that she is ancient. So I'm keeping her here at the top of the list because she isn't entirely evil and has comforted and even saved a few people on a few occasions, but still brings the end of the line. She keeps balance in the universe, taking away life while other cosmic entities give it. Also, she's a big part of the reason Thanos has done all the horrible things he's done in Marvel Comics, so there's that as well to make her seem a bit more evil.
Coming up on the 9th spot is Null. That's with a K. And this fella is bad news. He's an eldritch entity, the god of darkness, ruler of the void, and oh yeah, homeboy created the symbiotes. Any evil that's come from the many symbiotes can all be traced back to Null, who rules over the hive mind. When you stop and consider just how much suffering the symbiotes have been responsible for, how much damage and destruction, and all of that can be pointed back to Null, you gotta figure that is a pretty powerful ancient evil. Decked out with some sweet symbiote armor and an impressive sword, Null has his sights set on galactic conquest with the symbiote army. And honestly, he was making a pretty good play for the throne were he not stopped by Eddie Brock in a truly staggering duel of cosmic proportions. Sure, yeah, you might have birthed the symbiote race, but it's hard for anyone to top the guy who made symbiotes cool in the first place. You can't beat Venom. I mean, he's got his own theme song by Eminem. How many of us can say the same?
Number 8, Selene. While a lot of beings on this list are cosmic and godlike in their nature, Selene is a mutant external and a magician born 17,000 years ago. She gained the ability to psionically drain the life forces of other human beings into herself, gaining their memories, and if she fully drains them, turning that individual into dust. Yikes. Essentially, she is a vampire, just without any of the blood draining stuff. Using this drained energy, she not only sustains herself, but can grant herself superhuman levels of physical strength, speed, stamina, agility, reflexes, and durability, but that's not her only powers. As an external, she also possesses immortality, allowing her to even resurrect herself. Since she has been around for so long, she is quite the adept sorcerer and can do a hell of a lot with that power. She has demonstrated telepathy, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, and the knack for being just pretty sinister.
Number 7, Shuma Gorath. Now maybe you remember Shuma Gorath from a star-studded appearance in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Except psych! Due to a licensing issue, that was actually Gargantos. But it was supposed to be Shumagorath, so you were right to think that. Marvel's resident Lovecraftian god, who's lived for millions of years beyond the stars. Even older than the Marvel Universe itself. Quite literally, if you want to get a bit metatextual with it, since Shumagorath began life as a villain for the Conan mythos, tying itself into the greater Cthulhu mythos with H.P. Lovecraft, who was a pretty good friend of Robert E. Howard back in the day. It's a pretty interesting backstory and makes sense since Shumagorath is an all-powerful multi-dimensional entity. It only makes sense that it exists across the multiverse in ours as well. Shumagorath is about as powerful as a Lovecraftian god can get, boasting all the usual feats: incredible strength, difficult to put down, all kinds of psychokinetic abilities that leads him into all sorts of clashes with everybody's favorite sorcerer, Doctor Strange.
Number 6, the Black Winter. You know, Galactus almost made this list, but why choose him when you can choose a bigger version of him? Where Galactus consumes individual planets, the Black Winter devours entire realities. The Black Winter, the Star Plague, the Blight Storm, the Rot Blizzard, or the Fimbulwinter, for the Norse mythology people out there, was the one who brought the end of the 6th iteration of the universe, leaving only Galen of the planet Ta, and that's the guy who becomes Galactus. When the Black Winter arrives in the Marvel Universe in the latest run of Thor, Galactus turns an All-Father Thor, who possesses the Thor Force, into his Herald of Thunder, and it's awesome, granting him the power cosmic, and an attack from this Thor only stops the Black Winter for a total of 14 seconds. That's how powerful this multiversal entity is. Luckily though, at this time, the Black Winter isn't here to destroy the universe, he is just here for his herald, Galactus. Luckily, Thor turns Galactus into a massive power cosmic explosion that destroys the Black Winter. It's all just super awesome. Definitely check it out.
Number 5, Conan the Barbarian. That's right, Conan is an ancient superhero who actually also hails from Marvel. Not only that, but he was also an Avenger. Despite technically being a Marvel superhero, Conan is also kind of otherworldly, hailing from the sword and fantasy genre of comics. Although for Marvel, Conan is still labeled as an Earth 616 character, hailing from their main comic book reality. He does, however, come from the Hyborian Age, an old hero from the past. But he was one of the heroes still summoned by Doctor Strange and Elektra when they brought together their own team of Savage Avengers to stand against the threat of Kulan Gath. This went down in Jerry Dugan and Adam Gorham's Savage Avengers series, which I still really want to read. It looks super good. It just looks like such a great time. And Conan's presence on the team is definitely part of the reason for my motivation to jump into this series. Hopefully, in the near future. I have a lot of things to read.
And at 4, Mr. Majestic. I put this here because I like the word majestic, but also this is kind of weird. Mr. Majestic is a Wildstorm comic superhero created by H.K. Prager and Jim Lee. He made his first appearance in Wildcats number 11 as a backup story, but he's known for being the strongest superhero in the Wildstorm universe, and he shares quite a few similarities with Superman. But given that Wildstorm is owned by DC, there shouldn't really be any conflict there. Mr. Majestic is originally from the planet Kara and was known as Magistros, but yeah, this isn't like Superman at all. I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you saying that? He has 2 kids, Kanesha and Magistrate, but there was also an infertility crisis in his homeworld, which resulted in only 1 child per woman. Yeah, so how did this happen? Well, Magistros and Coda Warrior, Lady Xana, who's also later known as other things, it doesn't matter. They were chosen not to breed, but since Coda Warriors became priestesses after giving birth, Xana's mother pretended that Kanesha was stillborn and then claimed to have given birth to her herself. Yeah, so basically, Kanesha passed off her daughter as her sister, which is a whole... They're old. It's old. It's an old thing.
Number 3, Starbrand. Vin is the Starbrand in 1 million BCE. He ends up becoming the Starbrand after leaving his tribe. He left them because he believed he did not belong due to the fact that he realized he was gay. Something that seemed to be unacceptable to his people in that time. On his journey, he sought out a garden he had seen in a dream, which it turned out appeared to be the biblical paradise known as the Garden of Eden. Once he found it, he also found Burke. Also no vowels. No vowels for these people in prehistoric times. The 2 men became lovers, but would eventually be separated after Burke died in a deviant attack. It seemed the deviants wanted the garden for themselves. The attack resulted in a cave-in, and while Burke did not survive, Vin did, finding the body of a dinosaur who had previously been the Starbrand. Vin was imbued with its powers and fought against those who had killed Burke. However, in the process, this also destroyed the garden. Vin would go on to become the hero known as Starbrand in his time and join up with the other Stone Age Avengers of 1 million BCE. BCE.
But ultimately, in number 2, Doctor Strange Fate. Doctor Strange Fate is the amalgam of Doctor Strange, Charles Xavier, and Dr. Fate. Yeah, they're present in the amalgam universe of Earth 9602, and given that both the Sorcerer Supreme and Dr. Fate are present, I think that this qualifies as ancient. Dr. Fate alone just makes that happen. Strange Fate learned that 2 keys controlled by Access would restore the DC Comics and Marvel Comics universes to their own worlds, which would result in the destruction of the amalgam universe and therefore him. So, to keep his universe intact, Doctor Strange Fate recruits Jade Nova, Skulk, and White Witch to capture Access and bring him to Strange Fate so that the amalgam universe can remain active. But it turns out that he was actually a part of a problem, or a part of the problem. That's a story for another day. But Doctor Strange, yes, the real one, preserved the amalgam universe in a pocket dimension, essentially making it its own multiverse in a sense. But I also bring this up because I like the amalgam universe, okay? It's cool. Iron Lantern, Lobo the Duck, hell yeah.
Number 1. Man-Thing Sorcerer Supreme. Perhaps even more surprising is a reality where the Man-Things rule the planet. Their version of the 1 million BCE Avengers team is filled exclusively with Man-Things as a result. One of these Man-Things is known as the Sorcerer Supreme on this planet in the reality we know as Earth 91. Unfortunately, we do not get to know too much about this version of Man-Thing, as he is killed by the Masters of Evil when they come to his reality in Avengers Forever issue number 5 from 2022. What we do know is that like Dr. Stephen Strange and many other Sorcerer Supremes, this Man-Thing does seem to possess a cape, although it is a bit shorter than Strange's, I would say. His version of the Eye of Agamotto, or his version of the Third Eye, I'm not really sure what's going on with this, also seems to be something that he has, but he wears inside his chest, or on his chest. I think Dr. Strange ends up with a third eye at one point, but he's also got the Eye of Agamotto, so I don't know. Instead of Man-Thing wearing this anywhere else, or having it on a chain or a necklace, implying, that this eye is a part of him. Or perhaps it's simply, like I said, just a third eye, and it's just on the chest. I feel like that wouldn't be, I guess he doesn't really wear it close because he's a Man-Thing, so actually I guess it'd be fine. Number 10, Hero for Hire / Power Man. That's right, while Black Panther was one of the first superheroes of color to appear in comics, Luke Cage's Power Man would actually beat him when it came to having his own comic series. This series was originally titled Hero for Hire, but the name would later be changed starting with issue 17 to Power Man. The first issue of Hero for Hire came out in June of 1971, and Black Panther wouldn't get his own series until 1977. I know, strange, right? The name for Luke Cage's series would change one more time starting with issue number 50, becoming Power Man and Iron Fist. That name would stick with the series from issue 86 till its end in issue number 125. Number 9. The Amazing Spider-Man. When many people think of Marvel Comics, this is often the hero they think of first. The first volume of Amazing Spider-Man would see its very first issue come out in March of 1963, and the first issue was very much an origin story, one that we'd become all too familiar with in the animated series and films to follow about everyone's favorite Spidey-themed hero, Peter Parker's Spider-Man. The series would be a long-standing one and would produce hundreds of issues, and although it has been relaunched, the story of Peter Parker continues to be one that comic book fans everywhere have become obsessed with, making Spider-Man one of the biggest superheroes, especially one of the biggest superheroes to come out of Marvel Comics. Number 8. Fantastic Four. The Human Torch was actually the first character to appear from the Fantastic Four in Marvel Comics number 1 in 1939. Sort of anyways. Marvel Comics was an anthology magazine comprised of various heroes' adventure shorts. I know, I said no anthologies, but I think this is a pretty cool fact. The Human Torch that actually first appeared in Marvel Comics was actually Jim Hammond. Hammond would later be reinvented in the Fantastic Four team as Johnny Storm, Sue's brother, so the character, while different, is even older than the Fantastic Four comics itself, which is still pretty old, although granted that Human Torch wasn't obviously the same as the Human Torch that we have now. The Fantastic Four series started in 1961 with issue 1, which like Spider-Man's start was also an origin story. Watch out for those cosmic rays, or maybe don't if you want superpowers. Number 7. The Flash. Starting us off with Barry Allen's Flash, this series had hundreds of issues as well, though not quite as many as the Amazing Spider-Man series. It all started in March of 1959 with issue 105. While that might seem like an odd number to start on, it was because the series was picked up by DC Comics after All American Publications cancelled its predecessor, a series known as Flash Comics, which featured predominantly the adventures of the Flash and Hawkman. DC Comics actually was kind of once All American Publications. DC was the phoenix that rose out of the ashes of a few different comic book publishers who came together to create DC, of which All American was one. And then later, that original Flash 2 from Flash Comics, Jay Garrick, would also become part of our continuity. Fun fact. Jay Garrick was one of the few Flashes that actually got to retire, post to die, or go back into the Speed Force, or any of that fun stuff. Number 6. Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman would get her own series in 1942, shortly after her appearance in All-Star Comics issue number 8. The first issue even introduced a female associate editor of the magazine, Alice Marble. Marble was known as an acclaimed tennis player. While her time on the DC staff editorial board was brief, she was also a self-proclaimed fan of Wonder Woman, who was responsible during her time with DC for the Wonder Woman of History feature in the comic, which retold the stories of real-life famous historical women. Wonder Woman's first story involved her saving Steve Trevor, and introduced us to the world of the Amazons. Apparently, Amazons liked riding kangaroos around originally. Did you know that? At least they look like kangaroos, I don't know. Giant kangaroos, we ride them in combat. I wonder when horses became a thing in these comics. I need to read more old Wonder Woman, because it seems like a time. Number 5. Joe Chill. While we didn't know who he was at the time, Joe Chill would go on to become a huge supervillain in Batman's life. He would be known to Bruce Wayne as the man responsible for the death of Batman's parents. Well, responsible. More, he was known as the perpetrator. The circumstances surrounding the murder of Martha and Thomas Wayne in regards to it being part of a great plot or just a random mugging gone wrong would continue to be explored even after we found out Joe Chill's name. Either way, Joe Chill has been a huge villain in Batman's life anyways, because he took away Bruce Wayne's parents, which is kinda Batman's whole thing. Number 4. The Monk. The Monk first appeared in Detective Comics issue number 31, shortly after Batman's first appearance a few issues previously. He is often dressed in red robes, but his first appearance also featured him wearing a red cloth bag with eye holes on his head, marked with a skull and crossbones. So stylish. This was way back when Bruce Wayne also had a fiancée named Julie. The Monk ends up hypnotizing and kidnapping Julie. Batman, however, ends up chasing him down and facing a castle filled with booby traps in order to save his fiancée, who does not know apparently that her betrothed Bruce is actually the Bat. The issue ends with Batman swearing vengeance, soaring off to Hungary to find the Monk and his werewolves? I just love that part because I'm always like, wait, what do you mean you're going after his werewolves? He has werewolves? What? Did we find that out in that issue? I don't remember that being mentioned, but maybe I forgot. Number 3. Dr. Death. While his New 52 appearance is terrifying, Dr. Death actually first appeared in Detective Comics Volume 1, issue number 29, and looked just like your average mad scientist guy. He was one of the first supervillains that Batman ever encountered and is often known as a producer of biological weapons. You know, evil mad science stuff. Like most of Batman's supervillains, he isn't superpowered himself. His first appearance saw him being apprehended by Batman only to go down in a blaze of flames, though at least Batman tried to stop him from going down in a blaze of glory by tossing a fire extinguisher at him. So helpful, Batman, thanks for that. Needless to say, this wouldn't be the end of Dr. Death, and we would definitely see him again. Now he's got that crazy bone serum that just makes bones grow everywhere. Used it himself, so he's got these crazy teeth. You should show them the picture. Number 2. Ultra Humanite. One of Superman's first foes before Lex Luthor even. I know, it's crazy. If you haven't noticed yet, comics both seemed to act as a celebration for science while also having an obsession for its less honorable uses via mad science, as we like to call it. That's its own category of science for you science nerds out there. Just kidding. I know mad science isn't an actual category, but it should be. Apparently old school views were that science is awesome but can also be super dangerous, which, I mean, true. Ultra Humanite's brand of mad science came in the form of body swapping. A brilliant mind trapped in a frail, old, crippled body, Geralt dreamed of setting himself free of his decrepit and failing body and conquering the world. Just normal dreams, you know how it is. Becoming Ultra Humanite, he is known for inhabiting various female bodies in the DC universe, including Tara's for a time. Kinda weird. And for inhabiting the body of an albino ape. Those are his things. He's into apes and swapping bodies with ladies. It's normal. It's fine. Number 1. Namor. The Submariner appeared even before Marvel was called Marvel. Well, now he is definitely more anti-hero and he never really has been a bad guy when it comes to him as a character, he's definitely also a bit of a jerk with a dark side, even when he's acting heroically, which, not going to lie, is part of the reason that I think we all love him so much. He's just so complex. He can be anything he wants or anything he needs to be. A villain, a hero, an anti-hero. However, when he was first introduced in the Fantastic Four comics in issue number 4 of volume 1 in the early 60s, way after his initial introduction in April of 1939, I know, it was as a villain to the Fantastic Four. After remembering his life as Prince of the Sea, Namor returns to his lost home of Atlantis only to find that it had been destroyed by the radioactive pollution of atomic tests. He seeks vengeance and the Fantastic Four must stop him as he aims to attack the land, destroying the city and causing harm to the land dwellers who he deems responsible for the destruction of his home. Which was very villainous at the time, but I feel like now a lot of us are cool with this because we're like, hey, you know, the ocean's real polluted, so like, yeah, fair enough. Also, they really did that. They really used to set off atomic bomb tests underwater. That's a thing that we did. Shame on us. Number 10, Vandal Savage. Vandal Savage is definitely one of the most ancient villains out there. It's actually kinda like his whole thing. Savage originally existed all the way back in the prehistoric ages, having initially been a caveman. He got his powers from a radioactive meteorite which granted him immortality and enhanced intelligence. Even way back then, he was fighting heroes like Batman, if you can believe it. This was after Batman was sent on some time adventures after facing off against Darkseid. While he was suspected as being dead, in reality Darkseid's Omega Sanction had simply banished Batman to wander through time, which actually kind of sounds nice to me, except that part of this punishment was that his lives that he would experience were all supposed to be, well, pretty awful. Still though, when facing off against Vandal Savage, even with Vandal's somewhat newfound powers, Batman won. I mean, you can be ancient and immortal, but that doesn't mean that you're immune from being beaten by Batman, right? Batman's got that plot armor, baby. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we're doing here on Top 10 Nerd, and you love when I talk about supervillains, I know I do, be sure to check out our supervillains playlist over on the channel for even more good villainous content. Number 9, Surtur. Surtur is not someone we think of too often or even touch on, but he's a pretty big deal in the comics, and in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I mean, in the MCU, he successfully managed to destroy Asgard, fulfilling his prophesized role in Ragnarok. And what's more, Thor knew that this was what needed to be done in order to stop his sister Hela. So despite facing off against Surtur initially, he ended up having to be the one to free him so that the prophecy could actually be realized, sacrificing the place of Asgard in order to save the people of Asgard. In the comics, Surtur is an ancient foe, having been the sworn enemy of Odin for, well, pretty much forever. He hails from Muspelheim, and even for years successfully stopped Odin from achieving an alliance between the people of Odin's own Asgardian tribe, the Aesir, and the other Asgardian tribe known as the Vanir. Number 8, Sersi. Sersi is amazing. Definitely one of my favorite ancient villains around, possibly one of my favorite DC villains of all time around. Being that she is also the Circe from ancient Greek myth, I think you can understand just how old she is. Sersi is known for being a powerful witch, and in the Prime Earth continuity was also revealed to be one of Hecate's witch marked. Her insane magical ability is how she has been able to survive for so long, without also appearing to have aged much at all. However, I will also add that in the New Earth continuity, this is also thanks to the fact that Circe is actually descended from Titans, which not only makes her immortal and ageless, but also pretty durable as well. Circe is known for being a powerful Wonder Woman foe, but despite the fact that Wonder Woman is really well known among comic fans, I feel like her villains get less time in the spotlight for, I don't know, for some reason, despite the fact that Wonder Woman actually has a pretty stacked rogues gallery all her own. And like Circe, many of them also seem to have a rich and interesting history. Seriously, I feel like Circe could just like have her own comic series. That's how much she has and has had going on throughout her life and throughout the comics. Number 7, Morgan Le Fay. Speaking of powerful witches, Morgan Le Fay is a villain we really don't get to showcase or focus on a lot on this channel, so I am taking this opportunity to remind you of just how ancient and how bad she is. Morgan Le Fay is a villain who hails originally from Arthurian legend and was adopted as a character in Marvel Comics all the way back in 1955, making her first appearance in Black Knight issue number 1. But of course, she's actually much older than 1955 in terms of her canon character history. Morgan Le Fay existed just after the ancient and mythical times of the island of Atlantis. In this version of the story, not all of the island was lost, and actually some islands that were part of Atlantis still existed, chiefly Avalon, which is where Morgan was was born. Unfortunately, the remaining isles of Atlantis would eventually also be drowned and swallowed up by the sea, causing Morgan, her mother, and the man who would become known as Merlin to flee to Britain. This all happened before the 6th century, with Morgan eventually temporarily becoming Merlin's apprentice. As a villain, Morgan has not only tormented the people of her own time period, but she has also traveled to the present day and threatened the people and heroes of that time as well. Number 6. Barbatos. Barbatos is the Bat God who basically helped Batman to become what he is today, but as part of his own dark machinations. At least, Barbatos claims to be that. According to Barbatos, he was the bat that appeared before Bruce the night that he decided to become Batman, inspiring the young Bruce Wayne to go on to don the cape and cowl, and becoming a major symbol for Batman. Barbatos was once the loyal ally of the World Forger. He was a dragon who would destroy worlds that were unstable, often built on fear, known as belonging to the Forge of Worlds. Barbatos, however, grew to enjoy destroying worlds so much that he actually decided to rebel against the World Forger so he could destroy more worlds, ultimately destroying his master, which allowed him to corrupt his Forge of Worlds, with it warping and ultimately becoming known by a name you might be more familiar with, the Dark Multiverse. Just as the World Forger is one of the oldest beings in the cosmos over at DC, so is his pet dragon gone rogue, Barbatos. Barbatos would go on to recruit others to his new purpose to destroy the main multiverse. Number 5. The Old Guard. Can we call the Old Guard heroes? I'm not really 100% sure on that. They're ancient warriors who've been many things over the years. Not all the things they've done were necessarily good, but I would say for the most part, they've tried to stay on the side of good, so I think I'm gonna count them for this list. And that's definitely where they are at when it comes to where we meet them in the modern day. Or at least, the direction they're headed towards, I would say. Initially, the Old Guard were a group of immortal mercenaries led by their oldest member, Andy, aka Andromaca of Scythia, who is thousands of years old. It is in their welcoming of a new member that we get to see some of the good in them, despite them being essentially expensive, deadly, and nearly indestructible guns for hire. Their immortality is as much a mystery to them as it is to readers of the series, seemingly happening to each member miraculously and really without explanation. One minute they were alive, the next dead, and then inexplicably right back to living. In 2020, the Old Guard comics got their first film adaptation through Netflix. As with most Greg Rucka creations, the premise and his approach had me hooked, pretty much.
Number 4. Medieval Spawn. Okay, I'm gonna come right out and say this, I know nothing about Spawn. I did not watch the show, I never read the comics, I really have no right to be standing here in front of you talking about him, but I'm doing it anyways. Don't worry, I'm not actually talking about the Spawn. I'm going to be talking about Medieval Spawn. Naturally, Medieval Spawn was not only a Hellspawn, but also a knight living in 16th century England. And if you think about it, knights were almost like medieval superheroes, with tales and stories all their own. Sir John of York fought during a civil war in England, but was released from his service to Henry II after he and 3 others mistook the king's anger for orders and went and took the life of the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, once he passed at the hands of his king's bodyguards, he was sent to hell for his crimes, where he made a deal with Malbolgia and returned as a Hellspawn. He then went around England committing good deeds in the hopes of redeeming himself, but he continues to survive after being basically bonded to his armor and now possessing anyone who chooses to don his helmet. And I need to start reading Spawn. Right now.
Number 3. Witchblade. While most people think of Sarah Pizzini when they think of the Witchblade, Sarah was not the only one to wield the blade, and was, in fact, by far the first. One of the oldest Witchblade wielders was actually Samantha. Samantha hails from ancient Roman times, though she herself is not Roman, but instead was a native of an old Celtic town that they overtook named Cecilia. At least I think its name was Cecilia. There's also a character in the story with her that's named Cecilia, so that's a little confusing, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about that. Samantha was enslaved, but would eventually escape and end up running into druids out in the countryside, who believed she was the one who would be destined to save the other Celts from the Romans. She was given the Witchblade and would set out on a mission to destroy all Romans. While a hero ultimately, I would say, at least of her own story, Samantha's tale and alignment is pretty complex, which is often what makes Witchblade hosts like her so interesting.
Number 2. Martian Manhunter. I didn't actually know how old Martian Manhunter is. I knew that that he was the last of his race of Martians, and I know that he is extremely powerful and should never be slept on. And I know that he speaks with the resolve and intelligence of someone who has seen some serious shiznit. But when I found out that according to DC, he is in the ballpark of around or over 220 million years old, I gotta say, I took a moment to just digest that. John Johns, or John Jones if you want to be rude and go by his human name, arrived on Earth after he was pulled there by a teleportation beam during an experiment conducted by Dr. Saul Erdel, who brought him through space and time and then passed away from the shock of actually finding a Martian. This is because John's race was practically wiped out a long time ago, leaving him completely alone and isolated. But now on Earth, with no one to tell him what the hell was going on, he eventually used his shapeshifting abilities to become a detective operating in Middletown, America. For a long time, he mainly operated from the safety of his human persona before he eventually exposed himself to the world and became a founding member of the Justice League, and also one of its most powerful members. Just saying.
Number 1. Ghost Rider. Way before Johnny Blaze was even ever born, there was Ghost. Ghost is the original Ghost Rider, or at least believed to be the original Ghost Rider, the initial Spirit of Vengeance. Retroactively anyways, as he made his first comic book appearance after Johnny Blaze historically, appearing in Marvel Legacy issue number 1 from 2017. So obviously that's pretty recent, but you know, canonically one of the first. Ghost became the first Ghost Rider during the prehistoric era and did so in order to defeat the mysterious Wendigo, who took over his pack, becoming their leader only to eat the pack members save for Ghost. Ghost would stumble upon a snake and speak its real name in order to become Ghost Rider, the Spirit of Vengeance. He also has a cool mammoth, or he had a cool mammoth, and then he got another mammoth, and I think that mammoth's gone too, but he likes mammoths. He would go on to join up with the Avengers of 1 million BC. Number 10. Black Panther. The leader of Wakanda made his first comic book debut appearance in Fantastic Four issue 52 in 1966. He is often credited with being the first black superhero to appear in comics. The only sad thing is that it took us that long to get one. The 60s! Such a long time. In comics, so long. He was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. The first story involving him in the pages of Fantastic Four Volume 1 are pretty hilarious and great. If you haven't read them, you kind of should. They're interesting. Black Panther invites the Fantastic Four to Wakanda. Naive as they are, they accept. But what they don't know is that Black Panther longs to fight them. Of course, while the comic originally seems to be spinning Black Panther as a villain, it is later revealed that he only wanted to test them, and the fighting was merely to prove their merit as he needs their help. In the next issue, issue 53, we learn more about his backstory and why he has sought out the Fantastic Four. We are also introduced even more to the land of Wakanda with its unique combination of new age tech and tradition, old and new. So there you have it. Number 9. Green Lantern. Before Hal Jordan or Guy Gardner, there was Alan Scott. He was the first Green Lantern and was created by Martin Nodell, making his comic book debut in All American Comics issue 16. When this first Green Lantern made his appearance, he probably seemed to be pretty cool, I'm sure. This was way back when the Green Lantern was still an actual lantern, by the way. It's just this lantern he was carrying around. But in retrospect, Alan Scott is known as being one of the silliest Green Lanterns, because he has one of the strangest weaknesses in comic book history. Wood. While there definitely wouldn't be openly gay superheroes for some time yet since he was introduced in 1940, I like to think the fact that he is helpless against wood might pose a double or symbolic meaning. I'll just let you ponder what you will about that. But that's just me. Either way, the weakness is a hilarious one to see in comics, just villains beating him with wooden clubs and baseball bats, and it would later be fully explained and made semi-logical later on, but still, it's ridiculous. And I love it. Number 8. Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger originally started appearing in a comic strip and would later receive his own comic book series in 1948, which went for over 100 issues. Before he was even in comics though, Lone Ranger was a superhero recognized for his radio show, which debuted in the early 1930s. The first few comics consist of compilations of his comic strips, but new stories began with Lone Ranger starting with issue 38, which saw Paul S. Newman writing and Tom Gill on art. The Lone Ranger was known as a mysterious masked Texan Ranger who would fight bandits and outlaws in the Wild West of America, with his loyal pal Tonto and his trusty steed Silver. Hi-ho Silver away! Number 7. Tonto. You didn't think I was going to talk about Lone Ranger and just like leave Tonto out of this list, did you? Tonto was originally shown as Lone Ranger's native partner and was part of the Comanche tribe originally. Some may think of him as just a sidekick, but as time progressed his character tended to be more presented as an equal and partner to the Lone Ranger rather than just a sidekick. He got his own comic book spin-off series in the 50s titled The Lone Ranger's Companion Tonto, and was often depicted as being witty and sarcastic, even going on to mock other less favorable portrayals of himself in pop culture that made him seem more savage. I like when heroic characters are self-aware and sassy like that. I feel it. Deadpool, She-Hulk, Tonto. Keep being sassy, keep being witty. Number 6. Superman. Superman is that hero that you usually think of when someone asks who the oldest superhero is during a trivia night. And honestly, I'm sure it's an acceptable answer by most trivia standards. But not here. Not here. Here we go further. Superman is widely thought of as being one of the oldest, the original American comic book superhero. But seeing as how he is number 6 on this list, I think us mega nerds would likely know otherwise. Still, he came out in 1938 and first debuted in Action Comics number 1. And honestly, if you read his original appearance, it's easy to see what all the hullabaloo is about. It's basically a piece created to show off and introduce just how unstoppable Superman is. In fact, Superman would continue to be presented as near invincible until the 80s, acquiring more and more powers with each appearance. And then we had to fix that. We had to tweak that because it's too much power. Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster.
Number 5. Ra's al Ghul. Ra's al Ghul was born around 700 years ago, and thanks to the Lazarus Pits, he has been able to keep his body in working order. But he discovered the pits when he was an older gentleman and keeps the look of someone with a significant amount of years to him. After he came in contact with the pits, he eventually became a master martial artist and a master fencer, gaining a massive amount of wealth, and he started creating organizations to rid the world of crime, with his first being called the Demon, which the later League of Assassins is a branch of. Rage's purpose within the League of Assassins is to eliminate all evil in the world by destroying all of humanity and just starting all over. Obviously, that mentality means he routinely has run-ins with the superhero community, especially Batman, who he helped train. Rage has had many plans over the years that tried to destroy the world, and he has also beaten the entire JLA when he discovered Batman's notes. Now, with his years of experience and his vast amount of accumulated resources, this older fellow is a massive threat to both the heroes and the world. Number 4. The Joker. During the absolutely fantastic 3 Jokers storyline, we learn there have actually been 3 Jokers plaguing Gotham over the years, and among the 3 of them is the Golden Age Joker, and he is clearly much older than the other 2. Now, to be completely transparent here, whether this story is canon or not is an area of debate, so it's up to you if this one counts. But the Golden Age Joker, known as the Criminal, is the only one of the 3 Jokers to be a predominantly serious crime lord, and he even says that laughing and smiling is physically painful for him. Another thing that makes this entry a little arguable is that of these 3 Jokers, we don't know which one, if any of them, is the Joker. Even if only one remains in the end, the best part of this story is the uncertainty about which one is the one who started it all. Now, seeing as the Criminal is the oldest, classic version, he seems to be the one who started it all, creating more Jokers to mess with Batman. But the other 2 Jokers have been featured in incredibly important Batman stories as well. The comic really explores all of it, and if you haven't yet, make sure you check out Batman 3 Jokers as soon as possible. Number 3. Maestro. The Incredible Hulk has certainly been through the ringer in his decorated career, but few versions of the character are the living embodiment of that fact, like the Maestro. An alternate version of Bruce Banner from an apocalyptic future, this version of the character is far more intense and complex, but also much older. The best way to explain Maestro is to say that he is basically a smarter, older, villainous version of Dr. Bruce Banner, with all the powers and abilities of the original, but with a touch of nuclear radiation. He has much more of a cosmic and spiritual side to him than the normal Hulk does, but he is also twice as strong as Hulk is, and he retains all the intelligence of Bruce Banner, but with years and years more experience. Despite all that extra strength, brain power, and experience, he still gets outmaneuvered by the Hulk, who sends Maestro back in time to the site of the Gamma Bomb that created them. But even then, the Maestro's spirit remains on the bones left behind after the explosion went off and he came back to life. Number 2. Agatha Harkness. Like a few of these villains, when we first met Agatha Harkness in Fantastic Four number 94 from October of 1969, she was already elderly. She started out as the nanny for the newly born Franklin Richards, and using her magical powers, she even saved the Fantastic Four from the Frightful Four and a handful of other villains, and also helped Franklin when his powers first started to emerge. But she went on to have an interesting relationship with the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff, but also her mother, Natalia Maximoff. That's because this sweet nanny Agatha is actually an incredibly ancient sorcerer who was around to remember the sinking of Atlantis nearly 18,000 years ago. And she was probably the most powerful of the original witches during the Salem witch trials, an event that she actually supported as she thought it would cull the weak magic users who held them back. Agatha, like a lot of older villains, is pretty damn complex. She is held helped out heroes on multiple occasions, but she's also done some pretty sinister stuff. But there's no doubt that she is much stronger than both heroes and villains first assume. Number 1. Baron von Strucker. Baron Wolfgang von Strucker was born in the 19th century, so he ain't a young fella by any means. He fought with the Axis powers during World War II alongside and under the Red Skull. He was a top villain at the time, not just for Captain America, but more prominently as an adversary for Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos. And that carried through after the war ended, as Strucker was instrumental in the rise of Hydra and then became the Supreme Hydra. He was even responsible for the corruption of S.H.I.E.L.D., using Hydra to completely take over large parts of S.H.I.E.L.D. itself. When Captain America returned, and then the Red Skull did as well, Strucker began to lose his leadership role within Hydra, and so he faked his own passing, choosing to instead manipulate events from the shadows. Eventually though, Strucker got the Death Spore virus, which is why he is on this list. He's old, and many people don't know he has this particular enhancement. While he is an excellent strategist, a highly intelligent, exceptional hand-to-hand combatant, swordsman and marksman who uses Hydra tech to live longer and be in top physical condition, the Death Spore virus bonded Strucker's DNA with the Death Spore itself, enabling him to be revived after passing away. He hasn't aged since getting the virus, he heals at an incredible rate, is invulnerable to minor injuries, resistant to toxins and disease, and he can even release the Death Spore virus from his body at will, taking his victims' lives nearly instantly if he chooses to.
At number 10 is Tigra, first appearing in her own Marvel comic book called The Cat in 1972. This superhero just doesn't get the spotlight very often. Considering she has been a member of the Avengers in the past, it would only make sense that she might appear more prominently in more recent issues, or even MCU movies. But sadly, her most recent appearance was in a supporting role in Avengers Academy between issues 1 and 39. Tigra's powers began as an experiment by Dr. Joanne Tumalo, who gave her powers attached to her costume, and in this form she was simply known as the Cat. But down the line is when she eventually mutated into Tigra, a human-tiger hybrid, through a mystical ritual. She was then bound to a race of humanoid cat people from the Middle Ages, which she could then transform into on command from her human form, using the cat's head amulet. She's a pretty cool hero, so I wonder why they haven't really brought her back in any big way. Maybe they found her too similar to DC's Catwoman, who knows. Next up at number 9 is Stingray, an oceanographer turned superhero who builds his suit in order to explore the depths of the ocean. He helps construct an underwater city covered by a glass dome, which he uses to try and grow food for mankind. He first appears in Tales to Astonish number 95 in June of 1967, so he's just on the cusp of the golden age. Just about. This guy is no doubt an older Marvel creation, and if you haven't heard of him, you may not be alone. Although he has appeared as recently as the Iron Man 2020 event, he still only appears briefly as a side character facing off against Captain Barracuda. But at least the writers of that issue probably had the same thought as me, that he deserves to come around again. Once again, my hunch is that he's just a little too similar to DC's Aquaman, which might keep Marvel from giving him any more spotlight than they already have in more modern issues. Although his buddy Namor the Submariner, looks like a carbon copy of Aquaman. But Namor appeared for the first time in Marvel's first ever comic book, Marvel Comics number 1 in 1939, whereas Aquaman didn't appear until 1941. But I digress. It just seems that DC found a way to occupy the underwater superhero market, which keeps us from seeing more characters like Stingray and even Namor more often. At number 8, we have DC's The Question, or just Question. Like Stingray, this superhero first appeared in 1967, but isn't showcased very much anymore. Usually teaming up with the Blue Beetle, this superhero got his last solo series in 1987, lasting 36 issues. He originally had the secret identity of Vic Sage, but was later reimagined in the 2006-2007 miniseries 52, and his protege, Renee Montoya, takes over the mantle. This character is just a good old-fashioned fighter, only really having abilities in martial arts and I guess sleuthing since he's a journalist by trade, but he's just got such a simple and cool film noir kind of look, and it would be cool to see him in a lead role again. Again though, his abilities and look are strikingly similar to Marvel's Chameleon, so maybe by holding back on popularizing this character too much, they're just avoiding butting heads with their competitors. Once again, it's hard to tell. Okay, at number 7, we've got Marvel's Dominic Fortune, or Dominic Fortunov. This character is not only old in terms of his first appearance in the comics, but the character himself is aged to the point where it's known to be one of his biggest weaknesses. First appearing in Marvel Preview number 2 in 1975, this superhero needs a comeback for the sole reason that he's just a guy. He doesn't have any powers, but fought in World War II and always seems to be getting caught up in assassination attempts and weird odd jobs. Like one time when he had to babysit 3 drunken actors in Hollywood for a weekend and had to call the cops on them after things got out of hand. And after that, Fortune actually gets recruited to the Avengers by Nick Fury in 1959. He's just a good old-fashioned human superhero who runs into human troubles and stays in his lane, but ends up getting the opportunity still to support the superpowered Avengers with bazooka blasts and covert ops. At number 6, we have DC's Dr. Fate. This guy is old. He first appeared in More Fun Comics number 55 in 1940 and basically hasn't been mentioned again since his death in the Book of Fate number 1 in 1997. So yes, that's a long run, but still I'd like to see more of him. Dr. Fate is a superhero that's got so much going on and looks so cool that I don't know why he isn't used more often these days. His powers come from an incident when he, Kent Nelson, and his father were uncovering the tomb of ancient immortal Nabu, and Kent is basically trained by the ancient being and awarded with the Amulet of Nabu, a cloak, and a helmet. With the training and these items in his control, he has abilities ranging from magic manipulation and flight to invisibility, super strength, and resurrection, among others. It's just a really cool character based on real ancient myth, and I don't see any reason why Dr. Fate shouldn't have another comeback soon.
Number 5. Earth 15513, 1872. Technically, Earth 15513 is Battleworld, which is actually part of the modern Secret Wars story. The pocket dimension of the Valley of Doom is made of another Earth's version of the Wild West, mainly the town of Timely. Timely is run by its mayor, Wilson Fisk, and his enforcers, who ultimately answer to Governor Roxxon. Stephen Rogers is the sheriff in this here town, and he's a bitter but just man after the death of his deputy, Bucky Barnes. Anthony Stark is the town drunk, regretful of how his weapons were used in the Civil War. Natasha Romanoff is the widow of Bucky, with Bruce Banner being the doctor of the town. The new hero, Red Wolf, tries blowing up the Roxxon Dam, which almost results in his lynching, if it weren't for Sheriff Stephen Rogers, who saves him. Conflict blossoms when the agents of Roxxon, Bullseye, Grizzly, Elektra, and Dr. Octopus arrive in town and start running amok. Another story you have to read. I promise the steampunk-looking Iron Man will not disappoint you. Number 4, Earth 717, Captain America in the Civil War. The What If stories are so cool. In What If Captain America, Stephen Rogers actually fought in the American Civil War instead of World War II as General America, given powers from an ancient Native American eagle that also turned an evil racist Bucky Barnes into the White Skull, who became the leader of a white supremacist group. Because of General America's involvement in the Civil War, the Union won the war a year earlier than it normally would have. Abraham Lincoln survived his second term in office. He helped rebuild the South, suppressed the rise of a certain group of hooded racists, and prevented the Indian Wars from ever happening. He would go on to fight the White Skull and his new, deadlier hate group, eventually being succeeded by a line of Captain Americas who were his descendants. Well, hey there, time traveler. You're from the time period where YouTube still lets you like and subscribe, right? Well, if you're enjoying this video right here, why don't you just go and hit that thumbs up? It sure helps us out a lot. Alrighty, let's get on to the top 3. Number 3, Earth 90214, Marvel Noir. In this alternate version of Earth, superheroes debuted in the 1920s and 30s instead of their normal timing. This Earth 90214 brought us Marvel Noir, with subsequent noir versions of Punisher, Wolverine, Iron Man, Daredevil, Luke Cage, the X-Men, and most famously, Spider-Man. Each story is a fresh, unique, and awesome take on each character, seeing how superpowers in this world are pretty much non-existent except for a few characters. For example, Spider-Man was bitten by a spider, but instead of being based in science, his powers derived from a spider god. Or Wolverine didn't actually have claws, he just carries like brass knuckle blade things. Another example would be the X-Men, who are actually a group of sociopathic criminals, led by an Xavier who believed sociopathy was the future of the human species, which is just incredible. Number 2, Earth 811, Days of Future Past. Earth 811 is a future timeline where Sentinels rule over North America. After their creation, almost all mutants have been hunted and exterminated. The mutants that were not killed are kept in concentration camps. Even the heroes who aren't mutants have been exterminated. The Avengers, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Daredevil, they're all gone. But hey, this is the future, not the past. Yeah, I'm getting there, okay? Rachel Summers, the daughter of Jean Grey and Scott Summers, uses her telepathic powers to send Kitty Pryde's mind back into her younger self's body. Specifically, Kitty's mind went all the way back to the Halloween of 1980, where she informed the X-Men of what their future could become, and they prevented the assassination of Robert Kelly. The story is a whole lot more complex than that, and is also one of the most prized Marvel stories, so give it a read! Number 1. Earth 311, Marvel 1602. Okay, Marvel 1602 is my absolute favorite Marvel alternate universe. Fun fact, it was the first Marvel writing escapade for superstar fantasy writer Neil Gaiman. The universe actually got its start in a different alternate reality, Earth 460, where Purple Man became president for life. Most heroes had been hunted down or had died from old age, but after Captain America is captured, he is banished away to Earth 616's 1599, shortly before Roanoke was formed, which inadvertently created Earth 311. For some reason, the presence of Captain America destabilized reality and began the emergence of heroes and villains into this world who are counterparts to many of the present-day heroes and villains of the Marvel Universe. Count Otto von Doom the Handsome, Witchbreed, which are mutants, Grand Inquisitor Enrique, which is Magneto, Carlos Xavier, which is Charles Xavier, Four from the Fantastic, Sir Nicholas Fury, Peter Parquois, David Banner. The story is so interesting, intertwining actual history with superpowered beings. I highly recommend you give it a read if you haven't already. Number 10. Avengers 1 million BC, Earth 616. Alright, look, I promise this is the only Earth 616 story I'm mentioning, but given the team and the story, how can I not? The Avengers of 1 million BC came together in the prehistoric era to face Zagreb the Aspirant, basically a mad celestial. The team was made up of Odin Borson, wielding Mjolnir, the mutant Firehair, the avatar of the Phoenix Force, the sorcerer Agamotto, like the Eye of Agamotto, that guy, Fan Fei the Iron Fist, the first ever Black Panther of the Panther Tribe, a mammoth riding Ghost Rider, and Starbrand. They first appeared in Marvel Legacy number 1 in 2017, and I'm not even going to explain the rest. Just go read it, please! Earth 76611, alternate history. In Fantastic Four Annual number 11 in 1976, Power Man knocked a vibranium cylinder into Mr. Fantastic's time platform, sending it back in time. The cylinder was split in two halves. The important to this topic half landed in occupied France in 1942 and created an alternate branching timeline, Earth 76611. In this alternate timeline, the socialist Germans used the vibranium to advance their war effort, successfully invading England in 1943 and even making it to Manhattan by 1944, taking over America by 1946. That's what half a cylinder of vibranium can do, apparently. The Fantastic Four realized what happened though, and through some confusing tomfoolery, they managed to prevent this timeline from replacing the Earth 616 timeline. Number 8. Earth 9591, Ruins. This alternate reality is going to be the most recent one, taking place in the 90s. The timing of this one doesn't factor so much into its story though, as the more relevant detail is that this is the universe where literally everything goes wrong. The entire Fantastic Four, except Ben Grimm, who was replaced by Victor Von Doom, died on their test flight. The X-Men are held in a prison in Texas where they are horribly disfigured to stop them from using their powers. Peter Parker's spider bite caused an infectious rash that mutated his entire body and caused his hair to fall out. Bruce Banner becomes a monstrous mass of tumors. The Avengers all died in a rebellion. The Silver Surfer went mad, wanting to know what it was like to breathe air again. Nick Fury became a cannibal. All sort of that really lovely stuff, you know? I would not read this story unless you're okay with being upset, but I would read this story because it's good and it's interesting. Number 7. Earth 6799, 1967 Spider-Man cartoon. Bouncing off that happy little lovely tale, we have Earth 6799, or just Earth 67, which is actually the Earth where the 1967 Spider-Man takes place. Because of that, this Earth technically first appeared in Spider-Man Episode 1 Season 1 on September 9th, 1967. Its comic book appearance first comes in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 3, number 9, as one of the many alternate Spider-Man featured in this story. He also shows up in Spider-Verse Team-Up issue number 2 when Miles Morales and Peter Parker come to this Earth to find Spider-Man and recruit him to the fight against the Inheritors. It's super entertaining. Number 6. Earth 84243, Conan in the modern day's 70s. Some people may not know this, but Conan the Barbarian is actually part of Marvel Comics. And while the era he lived in, the Hyborian Age, is part of the 616 continuity, the What If story on Earth 79213 isn't. Instead of being in the Hyborian Age though, our boy Conan gets stuck in the 20th century. After visiting the Hyborian trade city of Akbitana, he is captured by a wizard who specializes in time travel. And instead of escaping, he is transported to Manhattan on July 13th, 1977. What does he decide to do with himself? Well, after scaring off some punks and throwing an old lady in a trash can, he has a romantic encounter with a modern age lady, Danette, who shows him the Guggenheim Museum, which reminds him of an ancient citadel, and they go to investigate. Here, he fights off some muggers and then gets struck by magical lightning that transports him back through time to his Hyborian age. But at least he got to keep Danette's cap as a reminder of their romance.
Okay, number 5, Marvel's Gargoyle. This superhero first appeared in Defenders issue number 94 in 1981, but since then he's actually retired and settled down in Greenwich Village. He even opened a restaurant called Isaac's Oysters. But he did go for one more rip for old time's sake, aiding Iron Man on a mission to take down the android Korvac. But that's sort of been it for him. And what's cool about this superhero is that he was sort of meant to be evil, but just chose good. He was formed when Isaac Christians agreed to place his soul inside a cursed gargoyle and do the bidding of the six-fingered hand. This was all in exchange for his issues to be resolved. But then when he was tasked with capturing Hellcat, a member of the Defenders, he couldn't get himself to do it and defied the six-finger hand and just sort of kept living on as this like possessed gargoyle who chose good. He kind of reminds me of Beast. He just has this super wholesome energy to him, and I just feel like he could do for more of that sweet limelight. At number 4, we have Zeta from Batman Beyond, and eventually the Zeta Project cartoon spin-off. The show ran from 2001 to 2002 as part of a spin-off to the Batman Beyond episode Zeta. This character is so wholesome and doesn't get enough attention, having been last seen 20 years ago in what would have been the final episode of the short-running series. This synthoid was built for the NSA to keep an eye on terrorist organizations, so his abilities are pretty extensive, being able to shapeshift into just about anyone to infiltrate and carry out covert ops with ease. He's a naive and friendly character who decides to go rogue after realizing that any one of his assassination targets could be innocent. Zeta had such a moment and clearly a huge approval rating since his one episode got him a whole series, but at a certain point, the world forgot about such a good and powerful synthoid superhero that definitely deserves a comeback. At number 3, there's Warlord, a character the world hasn't seen since his death in Warlord Volume 4, Issue 12. But there should be some kind of revival of Travis Morgan, who is another character on the list who doesn't actually have any powers, but is just a very well-respected and decorated war veteran. He also looks a lot like Oliver Queen or Green Arrow, which could have had something to do with it. They sort of acknowledge this when they finally meet in the same comic, and all of the Seattle underworld mistake Warlord for Green Arrow and attack him on sight. But whatever the reason is, Warlord's legacy deserves to be acknowledged with another appearance of some kind. I mean, the lore behind the character is that in past lives he's been Sir Lancelot, D'Artagnan of the Three Musketeers, and Crazy Horse among other legendary warriors and soldiers. He's just a great human character with, might I add, a really cool costume and some badass accolades to boot. Bring him back. Okay, at number 2 on the list we've got Komodo. This superhero really was a flash in the pan, only appearing on and off for a few years and having her legacy end with her powers being stripped. For a time, until they're restored again by Cloud9 and Hardball, but that's sort of it. And I think the last time she's been seen is in the Fear Itself storyline, which wrapped up in 2011, which is 11 years ago now, believe it or not. But this character needs to reappear in some way. The superhero was first created because Melody Kusama lost her leg in a serious car accident, and none other than Dr. Connors from, yes, the Spider-Man series, decides to endow her with the regenerative powers of a lizard. Well, not only that, of course, she actually turns into a lizard fully and at will and gains super strength, speed, agility, stamina, all that good stuff. I think this story is a good one to retell because who doesn't love a good story where someone confined to a wheelchair is able to not only walk again, but fight crime and be pretty damn good at it. Okay, last on the list is just my personal favorite, arguably obscure superhero 3D Man. An athlete turned superhero, 3D Man mysteriously gained superpowers after being stripped of his 3 Olympic gold medals. I mean, he was taking steroids, but there's always room for redemption, right? This character first appeared in 1998 and no one ever really talks about him. And to be honest, I didn't even know he existed until I started writing this list. And I want this hero to get more spotlight primarily because I'm a sucker for early 2000s culture, and this character is just such a great time capsule for that period, where everybody was obsessed with 3D for some reason, with DVDs coming with 3D glasses in the case, remember that? And 3D Man has the same nostalgic look to him, with many of his appearances being colored in green and red. If you want to look him up yourself, you'll notice that he originally went by the name of Triathlon and later changed to 3D Man during the Secret Invasion storyline. This guy just looks so cool and hits home with some good nostalgia for me, as well as probably anyone from the Gen Z or millennial generations. And there's also just a silly factor there too. 3D Man needs to come back. Please, can we? Just for 1 second.
Number 10. Chameleon. Chameleon made his first appearance in the very first issue of The Amazing Spider-Man. Although there are a lot of other famous supervillains that people think of when it comes to Peter Parker's gallery of famous and capable rogues, Chameleon was the first that Spider-Man would come up against. In this very first issue, Spider-Man attempted to join the Fantastic Four, who basically fight him due to the fact that they think he's some kind of villain for breaking into the Baxter Building. Of course, Spider-Man was only attempting to do so to impress them so they would invite him to join their team. When they refused to accept him into the team, Spider-Man set on his own to fight crime, and Chameleon disguised himself as Spider-Man to protect his own identity while committing crimes himself, ruining Spidey's reputation and ensuing Peter to go up against Chameleon to put a stop to him. Number 9. Dr. Von Doom and his Doombots. Sounds like a cool band. Dr. Von Doom and his Doombots. We were first introduced to Dr. Doom as a supervillain in issue 5 of the first volume of the Fantastic Four. In his introductory issue, the famous and brilliant villain used his brains and gadgets to capture the Fantastic Four. He wanted them to help him capture Blackbeard's treasure by using a time travel machine that he had constructed to send them into the past. In the end, they tricked him with a chest full of chains, and the thing smashed Dr. Doom to bits, only to find out that the Doom that they were dealing with was actually a robotic copy. The actual Doom also ended up getting defeated as well, and the Fantastic Four got away. But this certainly wouldn't be the last that they would see of Doom, who would become their most iconic foe. Number 8. Miracle Man. What's up with all these original Fantastic Four rogues who kidnapped Invisible Woman, by the way, or Invisible Girl as she was known then? Apparently, kidnapping Sue was a classic villain move back in the day. Miracle Man was originally a stage magician who claimed that he was even more powerful than the Fantastic Four, who just so happened to be in his audience when he was performing. After that he proved this in his stage show, he decided that he should probably become a criminal. He was so talented and smart and obviously, I guess, selfish and villainous somewhat, if he decided to go that route as opposed to the heroic one, that he made the Fantastic Four think that a promotional statue for a film called The Monster of Mars had come to life. While the Fantastic Four were distracted dealing with that whole scenario, he pulled off a series of robberies. But don't worry, he was defeated. After, of course, he kidnapped the Invisible Girl. Like I said, that's a thing that people like to do back in the day. Number 7. Skrulls. That's right, Skrulls are some of the oldest villains around. Did you know that? I know, it's pretty surprising. Although they aren't exactly considered clean-cut villains anymore. They have even teamed up with Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers, before to help save the universe. Originally, however, the Skrulls appeared in Fantastic Four Volume 1 Issue 2 and were hell-bent on invading Earth. This was right after the FF team had been introduced, which was basically all that issue 1 was about, an origin story. The Skrulls knew that the FF were the main protectors of Earth, despite the fact that they'd sort of just started their superhero career, which is kinda weird. Anyways, they decided to impersonate the FF, commit a bunch of villainous deeds while impersonating them in order to frame them and have Earth's military capture and kill the Fantastic Four team, so that the Skrulls Skrulls might then invade Earth with no one powerful enough to put a stop to them. Of course, this plan was foiled when the FF trapped the imposters, unmasked them as Skrulls, and ended up posing as those Skrulls to tell the Skrull leader that Earth's defenses were too powerful for the invasion to succeed, thus scaring them off. Basically, they defeated an entire Skrull invasion in that comic, so that's pretty impressive. The Skrulls that originally posed as the Fantastic Four members were forced to stay behind after the invasion left, because obviously the Fantastic Four was not going to let them go back up onto that ship. So they then decided to take the form of cows and continue to live on Earth in apparent peace. Peaceful cows. Apparently they'd rather be anything but Skrulls, so they said in the comic, which I thought, oh, it's kind of like rude. I'm sure there are Skrulls that really like being Skrulls. Ugh. Number 6. Dr. Sivana. If you've seen the film Shazam, you likely are familiar with Dr. Sivana, or if you're aware of the Captain Marvel / Shazam comics. He was one of the first villains that Shazam actually came up against and made his comic book debut in Whiz Comics issue number 2. His first master plot of villainy? To ransom radio waves. The 1940s, what a time. He asked for $50 million and if he wasn't paid, threatened to create radio silence everywhere. Because this was the 40s, of course, that was a really big deal. Although right now we'd probably be like, who listens to the radio? But also $50 million is an insane amount of money to ask for. I feel like if Dr. Sivana hadn't been so greedy, it might have worked out better for him. Because $50 million in the 1940s? Jeez! In the end, Billy Batson and his Captain Marvel form defeated Sivana by smashing his radio silencer tech, which was like this huge machine by the way, to smithereens. But as promised, the Doctor would return to battle Captain Marvel, or as he's known now, Shazam, again, becoming one of his mainstay villains. Number 5. Green Lantern. This comic was originally published by National Periodical Publications, who, as we know now, would later become one of the companies that would amalgamate into DC Comics. The series would run for 38 issues and would introduce the first Green Lantern, Alan Scott. One of my favorites to bring up because I get to talk about his weakness to wood. In this first issue, we would discover how Alan got his powers from both the Green Lantern ring and an actual Green Lantern, which was created by an old Chinese lamp maker from molten green space metal that had crashed to Earth via meteor. This original series really put the lantern in Green Lantern. It's not even a funny joke, it's just really bad. You're welcome. Number 4. Captain Marvel Adventures. Captain Marvel Adventures was the spin-off from Whiz Comics, an anthology series that featured the ever-popular Captain Marvel. Captain Marvel Adventures was the original series for the hero, produced by Fawcett Publications. Alright, let's get into the craziness of Fawcett, here we go. Fawcett would end up cancelling the series and all other superhero series eventually as a result of the lawsuit filed against them in regards to Captain Marvel's similarity to Superman, who had belonged to National Periodical Publications at the time the lawsuit was filed in the 1940s. Still, Captain Marvel Adventures would go on to have 150 issues before it was cancelled in the 1950s. National Periodical Publication would later evolve and merge into the famous comic book publisher that we know today as DC Comics. And as Fawcett was closing up shop, DC would end up picking up the rights for Captain Marvel, aka Billy Batson, in the 1970s. Captain Marvel under DC would eventually evolve to become Shazam, originally the name of the magician who gave Billy his powers in his origin story in Whiz Comics. Although later that magician would have a different name, have no name, all sorts of crazy stuff. The name change happened after Marvel Comics sued DC for rights to the name in regards to their own separate Captain Marvel, who first appeared in the Marvel Superhero series in 1967. Oh, comic book characters and lawsuits. Woo! I hope that clarified some of that crazy lawsuit stuff for you, or made it more confusing. Either way, I hope you learned something. Number 3. Captain America Comics. Captain America was one of the first Marvel heroes to get his own series. Captain America Comics was the original name of the series, and its first issue came out in March of 1941. Unsurprisingly, the cover features Cap punching Hitler in the face, pretty much establishing what kind of hero Steve Rogers would be from day one. The kind of guy that likes to punch Nazis in the face. That's his thing. That was his thing anyways. Then he got frozen in some ice, then he woke up, did some other stuff. You know how it goes. Number 2. Batman. After making his first appearance in the Detective Comics series in issue 27, Batman would shortly after get his own series and go on to be one of the most iconic heroes in comic book history, and obviously one of my favorites. The first issue of Batman came out in March of 1940. It featured an origin story and introduced us to Batman characters who would go on to become some of the most famous, including Robin, James Gordon, Joe Chill, Hugo Strange, Catwoman, and Batman's one true supervillain, the Joker. Number 1. Superman. Superman first appeared in the anthology series Action Comics, and like Batman, he would soon after get a series to call his own. Superman Volume 1 Issue 1 would come out in June of 1939, almost a full year before his future BFF and fellow JLA member Batman. Superman's first issue was the typical origin story fare, but as soon as issue 2, we would also find ourselves introduced to some of Superman's mainstays, mostly in the way of supporting characters. In issue 2, we would meet both Superman's young pal Jimmy Olsen and his future girlfriend slash wife slash baby mama Lois Lane. Slash sometimes she's superwoman herself. That's also happened. Oh, Lois Lane. She's a pretty cool lady.
And for this list, starting off at number 10 is Magneto. Starting off this list with the absolute GOAT. Magneto has been around for a long time, and a majority of that time, he was a villain, or at best, an anti-hero. As the #1 rival of Professor Charles Xavier, Magneto's view of the world is pretty interesting given that he was the child of a Jewish family during World War II, and yet, after years of persecution for being a mutant, he believed his race to be superior to regular humans nonetheless, and that humans should be subservient or destroyed. Under this mentality, he led the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants as well as other groups against the X-Men and the Earth's heroes. Now everybody knows that Magneto is not someone you mess with. He has enough power and enough experience to stomp almost anyone. For example, while he has become more of just a hero nowadays, there's a point where he gets his heart ripped out by a villain called Uranos. But he keeps himself alive by using his powers to keep his blood flowing. He's just that insanely powerful. But being born around World War II and the rival to Charles Xavier, he's been up there in the age department since he was introduced, but always manages to decimate his enemies. Number 9, Cassandra Nova. Sticking with X-related heroes, we have the evil twin, or counterpart, or anti-self to Charles Xavier. Cassandra Nova isn't really a mutant, but she isn't really a person either. She's actually what is known as a Mumadrai, the spirit that is equal to the opposite of a person. Wrap your head around that one. This is about to get wild, so buckle up. Because of the genetic mutant potential of Charles Xavier, his Mumadrai was able to create a physical form for itself when Sharon Xavier was pregnant with Charles, making Cassandra basically Xavier's twin. Now Charles, even as a baby, sensed Cassandra as an evil presence, and he used his psychic abilities to try and take her out in the womb. Cassandra survived though, and so she spent decades as this terrifying mass of cells in a sewer, building herself a new body and planning her revenge on her brother. Cassandra has all the same telepathic powers as Charles himself, plus some telekinetic abilities as well. But being a Mumadrai, she has the terrifying ability to manipulate DNA, breaking it down, copying it, and being able to construct physical bodies. She can even phase through solid objects, regenerate insanely fast, and enhance and evolve other mutant abilities. Number 8, Granny Goodness. Stepping away from Marvel for a moment, Granny Goodness is probably the complete opposite of anything we would describe as goodness. She was originally one of the lowlies, which is basically the peasant class on DC Universe's Apocalypse. From a younger age, she was taken by Darkseid and raised and trained to become head of the Shock Troops and the Female Furies. She has the responsibility to bring young warriors from other worlds to fight each other to earn the right to be trained by her. But Granny Goodness also has multiple orphanages where she both trains and disciplines younger individuals looking for potential warriors for Darkseid. Now being a resident of Apocalypse, Granny here does have quite a bit of power. She has superhuman strength, speed, durability, and senses, as well as invulnerability and an advanced immune system and immortality. But being immortal doesn't necessarily save you from looking old as hell, which is why we get Granny Goodness. Number 7, Horticulture. You know, sometimes a group of villains comes along that just kinda makes me smile. And Horticulture, who first appeared in X-Men Volume 5, number 3 in December 2019, are one such group. Horticulture is described on their wiki as a group of agrochemists, biotechnologists, and eugenic engineers who specialize in the genetic manipulation and propagation of all things botanical. So, to me and my tiny brain, I take that information and translate it to, it's a bunch of old plant scientist ladies. because that's what they are. It's a bunch of older ladies who are seeking to radically depopulate humans from the Earth in order to bring the Earth and nature to a state of balance. With the climate the way it is right now, it's actually kind of an understandable cause, even if it's utterly insane. Using their know-how, they made biological modifications to themselves, like resistance to telepathy and extended lifespans, but they also developed technology to manipulate their environment, inhibit mutant powers, and generate illusions on men. But they also have experience as computer programmers, being able to access the Krakoan gateways and trade information with the villainous anti-mutant group known as Orcus. Number 6. Old Loki from the MCU. Alright, I'm going to step away from the pages of comic books altogether here. During the MCU's Loki show, Loki gets sent to the Void, where the whole place is basically filled with other alternate versions of himself. But he specifically became part of a group of 4 other Lokis: Boastful Loki, Alligator Loki, Kid Loki, and the topic for today, Classic Loki. Classic Loki had a similar story to regular Loki from the Sacred Timeline, but when confronted by Thanos in Avengers Infinity War, this Loki decided to use duplication magic to survive the whole thing. He then spent a hell of a long time on a remote planet, ashamed of the nefarious things he had done over time. When he finally tried to return to see his brother, Thor, who he missed, he was an older man, and them meeting caused a divergent timeline, getting himself pruned and sent to the Void. He has probably one of the best moments in the show. When Sylvie, Loki, and Mobius try to escape from the Void, and the reality-consuming Alioth tries to stop them, Classic Loki uses his magic to create a true-to-life, massive illusion of Asgard itself, all while this weird version of Ride of the Valkyries was playing in the background, distracting Alioth and giving me just straight-up goosebumps. Like, I am actually getting them right now just thinking about it. Like, it was such a cool moment. Satisfying.
Number 5. Punisher. Probably one of the most iconic when it comes to the idea of what an anti-hero is. Frank Castle was also one of the first. It's likely because of him as well that the idea of seeking revenge became a somewhat dark one. The Punisher's main quest is to get vengeance, not just for himself, but for others whom he thinks deserve it. Originally, he turned to a life of vigilantism after the death of his family, who happened to be on a picnic at the wrong place, the wrong time, and were witnesses to something they shouldn't have been. As such, they were eliminated by the mob. Despite also being shot, Frank survived the attack, though the rest of his family died, and as a result, he swore revenge. He's also known for being an overly violent hero who fights with guns, which is something most heroes look down upon, preferring to use non-lethal force. The Punisher would achieve next-level anti-hero status when he also became the first anti-hero to kill the entire Marvel Universe in 1995, in Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe, paving the way for another popular anti-hero, Deadpool, to also do so years later. Of course, it would take Deadpool until the 2000s before that would even be a thing for him. The 2010s, as it were, actually. Number 4. Wolverine. Logan, being considered a little more rough around the edges and animalistic, is what quickly granted him an anti-hero status. As far as superheroes go, he was different. He made his first full appearance in The Incredible Hulk Volume 1, Issue 181. Since the beginning, his violent nature and broodiness has made him both well-loved by fans, but sometimes disliked by other heroes. He also has less hang-ups when it comes to killing people, even suggesting at times that it's the best course of action when dealing with villains, and having a pretty big thing for mercy killing when it comes to other heroes. This has also made Logan one of the biggest anti-heroes in the X-Men world. He just kills tons of people. People will be like, I think I'm gonna die, and he's like, I got you, don't worry. I'll make it quick. Number 3. Magneto. Magneto has been known as the foil to X-Men's Professor Xavier for years. Xavier was also the leader of the X-Men, while Magneto was the leader of the first Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, who were often the X-Men's enemies. Still, Magneto does what he does often to make the life of mutants better, albeit through punishing humanity, which, you know, not so great. And while he has spent a lot of time being a villain, over the years he has definitely shifted more to anti-hero, especially in the new Dawn of X Mutant relaunch, where he often works alongside Charles. Although Charles is always like, calm down, man. And he's like, no! I will slightly overreact, because I'm Magneto, and that's what I do. Number 2. Catwoman. Catwoman has always operated more on the edge of what's right and wrong since her introduction, which is part of the huge appeal when it comes to her, and has been part of a huge problem in regards to her on and off again relationship with Batman. Though Batman wasn't really a saint either when it came to his early days, but anyways. When Catwoman first appeared in Batman Volume 1 issue number 1, it was as a jewel thief, and Batman at the time was engaged to a woman named Julie. Still, he was tempted to join her and become her king of crime, but when he refused her, she managed to escape his clutches, sneaking away. Batman really hoped that he'd run into her again despite her criminal tendencies, and despite the fact that he was engaged, and his wish would eventually be granted. Catwoman would even team up with Batman and join him in his acts of heroism, though originally it would often be for her own motives alone, but she became more of a hero as time went on. Number 1. Namor. Namor is an interesting one. When he first debuted in Motion Picture Funnies Weekly, it was as a young prince attacking land dwellers, seeking revenge for his people. He would then go on to join the fight in World War II, fighting against Nazis with heroes such as Captain America. Later, he would forget who he was and only regain his memories when he was accidentally knocked into the ocean in the original Fantastic Four series by Johnny Storm. He would then rediscover who he was and that the kingdom that had been his underwater home had been destroyed by the Humans War's nuclear bomb tests, and as a result would attack the land, becoming a villain. Again. Since then, he has done a variety of good and not always so good things, but what remains constant is that Namor's methods have pretty much always been questionable. His return to being good, but in his own way, and still while thinking very highly of himself, made him an anti-hero. And while he is very passionate about protecting his people, there is no doubt that this means he would also do anything to safeguard Atlantis, regardless of how morally ambiguous or severe it might be. Number 10. Helena Wayne as Huntress. Before Helena Bertinelli was Huntress, we had Helena Wayne. Helena Wayne was the daughter of Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, Batman and Catwoman respectively. Although she didn't come from a crime family, she was still heavily trained by her parents, and eventually took up the mantle Huntress as a vigilante. Like the main continuity Huntress, she was also known for being more violent than was considered acceptable. After her mother's death, she moved out and blaming the criminal Silky Cernak for her mother's death, as he had blackmailed Selina into returning to a life of crime as Catwoman, Helena Wayne set out for revenge. Catwoman died when she returned to her life of crime. No. Mom, why? Number 9. Venom. Venom would technically make its first appearance in issue 252 of Volume 1 of the Amazing Spider-Man series, but it wouldn't be until almost 50 issues later in issue 299 that the suit would develop a mind of its own, or well, bind its own mind with that of Eddie Brock's mind, and be introduced to us again as Venom. Once Eddie had got his hands on the suit, he began to plot sweet, sweet revenge on Peter Parker. But during his first appearance, Peter, who was also rocking a black and white suit at the time, albeit not the symbiotic one, I know, confusing, was not at home, so instead, Venom ran into MJ in her and Peter's apartment, scaring her senseless. Eddie would go on to terrorize Peter, but the two would at times reluctantly team up to take on even bigger bads, as despite being kind of a bad guy, Eddie had sort of a moral code. He definitely didn't like to kill innocent civilians and tried to avoid that when possible, though also he sometimes did that. The two teamed up to take on villains like Carnage, and eventually Eddie would become a hero in his own right. He's probably got one of the best story arcs in comics because of his gradual transformation since his introduction as Venom in '88 from complete villain to, well, complete anti-hero. Maybe even like full-on hero now. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is Venom a full hero yet? Can we go there? Number 8. John Constantine. Constantine made his first appearance in Swamp Thing Volume 2, issue 37. He is known as an occult detective from England who likes to do things his own way. He's somewhat violent and reckless, with somewhat of a disregard for the smaller things. To John, sometimes you have to break a few eggs or sacrifice a few souls to make an omelet. And as long as it's for the greater good, he's sometimes fine with that. In his own series Hellblazer, which started in 1988 and ran for over 300 issues, the original tone of the series was quite dark, because the series also came out as part of DC's Vertigo line, which was known for being one of the darkest imprints that DC ever had. Of course, sadly, Vertigo is no more, but in its place we now have the stunning DC Black Label, so I guess it's fine. Just kidding, DC Black Label's really awesome. But still, can't we have both? Can't we have both DC? Number 7. V. V comes to us from Alan Moore and David Lloyd's series V for Vendetta. He's a mysterious character who is also known as Patient Number 5, who's said to be one of the many victims of abuse in a resettlement camp run by the fascist and villainous Norsefire-ruled government. It is believed that V was a test subject at the camp who escaped. He then adopted the mantle V and began to work on building an anarchistic uprising to topple the oppressive regime. His methods were meant to appear morally ambiguous so that readers could decide how to see him, as a hero or as a madman. V made his first appearance in the series Warrior in issue number 1. Also, if you haven't checked out that little story that he's in Warrior, V for Vendetta, it's really great. Just saying. Also, the series is great. Number 6. Black Cat. Black Cat was first introduced in The Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1 issue 194 as a thief, and she continued to be that for quite a while. But she was also introduced as a love interest for Spider-Man at the same time, which she would also continue to be for some time. Distracting Spidey with a kiss, she was able to get away with the goods she needed and succeeded in breaking her dad out of jail as a result. Though we wouldn't learn her dad's connection to her until the next issue. Being a mysterious figure with self-serving motives has always left her painted as an anti-hero, even when she has heroic intentions at heart. Although Felicia Hardy has played both sides before as well, being a full-on hero and a full-on criminal at times. Number 5. Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. You might be wondering just where Wonder Woman is on this list, but Sheena actually predates Wonder Woman, and her own self-titled series even predates Wonder Woman's by a few months. She was originally published by Fiction Comics and was known as Sheena, Queen of the Jungle. Most 1930s Queen of the Jungle I have ever seen, but yet. Sheena's abilities included super strength and agility and the ability to communicate with animals. She made her first appearance in WAG Comics issue number 1, and her self-titled series came out in early 1942, just a few months before Wonder Woman. Only a few months, so close, so close! Number 4. Kazar. Kazar is known as being one of the first Marvel superheroes. Can you guess who the other one is? Let me know in the comments. But there are actually 2 Kazars. The one I'm referring to here is David Rand. He appeared in Marvel before they were even known as Marvel, back when they were Timely Comics in 1936. Kazar shared many similarities with Tarzan and was very passionate about protecting the surrounding wildlife and animals where he grew up. He also fought against Germany with the Allies in World War II, fun fact. In fact, the last story we have of him shows him setting out to provide more wartime aid. The other Kazar we would meet later in the 60s was known as Kevin Reginald, and was the son of the man who discovered Savage Land. Both Kazars also appear to be English. They had an English heritage anyways. Interesting. Number 3. The Phantom. The Phantom originated in comic strip form, where so many superheroes were originally born. He was created by Lee Falk. The Phantom actually introduced the idea of a costumed adventurer to American comic books. Before that, we didn't really have people in like tight spandex running around. While the Phantom, aka Kit Walker, found popularity in comic strips in the US, his comics didn't quite shine so bright. Internationally, however, the character seemed to do much better, becoming a hit in Australia, Sweden, and Papua New Guinea. He also was originally from a fictional country in Africa, so no wonder he did well in Papua New Guinea. I feel like they were like, I can see some similarities here. Number 2. Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers first appeared in a comic strip. He is a hero who comes from a world of sci-fi set in the future of the 2400s. 24,000s? 2400s, yeah, 2400s. Depending on what medium or comic you're reading, the last 2 digits of that year are also apt to change for his story. He made his comic strip debut as Buck, but the character was originally named Anthony Rogers in the novel that inspired the comics, Armageddon 2419 AD, written by Philip Francis Nolan. The story follows the adventures of a young man who is frozen for almost 500 years in suspended animation before waking up in the future and rediscovering the world he once knew, in a time that he is less familiar with. Honestly, if you aren't aware of Buck Rogers, but you are a fan of cosmic superheroes or sci-fi and weird space adventures, I highly recommend you check this classic out. Also, if you just like some time travel-y stuff. Who doesn't like time travel-y stuff? Everyone is like me, I hate it, but there's a few of us I know that like it. Number 1. Spring-Heeled Jack. Spring-Heeled Jack was originally a character in English folklore and urban legends. His being was reportedly cited all over Great Britain in the 1830s, and the stories involving him inspired writers to use him as a character in both a play and in Penny Dreadful novels, which were short serials, the original comic books really of the time. He has since seen other comic book series dedicated to him as time has progressed. Spring-Heeled Jack was originally described as a gentlemanly looking demon, and later described as looking like the devil himself, complete with horns. He was often known for breathing breathing fire. Whoa, scary stuff. While his character was originally posed as a villain, he later developed into a misunderstood hero, a nobleman who sought to steal from the rich and give to the poor, complete with his own gadgets to help him perform his noble feats. Kinda like Robin Hood meets Batman. It's kinda what he was doing. Meets a guy that looks like a demon. Just combine all those, you got Spring-Heeled Jack.